The plane jerked through turbulence at 35,000 feet, and Victoria Hale's head dropped onto the shoulder of a complete stranger. She didn't wake. Didn't know that the exhausted single father beside her had just made a choice that would unravel everything she thought she knew about success. While she slept, Ryan Brooks noticed her dying phone, the device she'd been frantically working on moments before, and quietly plugged it into his own power bank. It was such a small gesture, meaningless, really, except it wasn't. Because sometimes the quietest acts of kindness are the ones that change everything. If you're intrigued by stories about unexpected connections and the power of simple compassion, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Victoria Hale had perfected the art of not being seen. Not in the literal sense. At 5'9" in tailored Armani heels that added another 3 inches, she was impossible to miss. But she'd mastered the particular kind of invisibility that came with power, the way people looked at her title instead of her face, heard her net worth instead of her words, saw her corner office instead of the exhaustion carved into the lines around her eyes. She was 38 years old and had built Tech Vanguard from a garage startup into a billion-dollar enterprise in less than a decade. Forbes called her a visionary. TechCrunch dubbed her the Ice Queen of Innovation. Her investors loved her ruthless efficiency. Her competitors feared her strategic brilliance, and absolutely none of them knew that she couldn't remember the last time she'd slept more than 4 hours or eaten a meal that didn't come from a corporate cafeteria or hotel room service. The O'Hare Gate area hummed with the particular energy of business travelers on a Friday afternoon, rolling suitcases, rapid-fire phone conversations, the sharp scent of overpriced airport coffee. Victoria sat in the priority boarding section, laptop balanced on her knees, responding to emails with the mechanical precision of someone who'd forgotten how to do anything else. Her assistant had booked her usual first-class seat for the flight to Los Angeles, where she had a breakfast meeting with potential investors, followed by a keynote at a tech conference, followed by drinks with her West Coast team. 72 hours of calculated networking compressed into what other people called a weekend. Flight 2847 to Los Angeles is now boarding all passengers. Victoria closed her laptop with a decisive snap and joined the queue, barely registering the faces around her. She'd become an expert at that too, moving through crowds without really seeing anyone, conserving her limited emotional bandwidth for moments that mattered to the bottom line. The flight attendant scanned her boarding pass with a practiced smile that Victoria returned with an equally practiced nod. She found her seat, 1A, window, exactly as requested, and began the familiar ritual of settling in. Laptop in the seat pocket, phone and charger on the console, noise-canceling headphones within easy reach. She was reaching for her seatbelt when she noticed the commotion across the aisle. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, was pointing excitedly at something outside the window while a man, her father, clearly, tried to help her buckle her seatbelt while juggling a small backpack decorated with cartoon characters. The girl's voice carried with the unself-conscious volume of childhood. "Daddy, look! Is that our plane? Is it that big one?" "That's a different plane, sweetheart. Ours is the one we're sitting in right now." The father's voice was patient, warm, textured with the kind of exhaustion that came from love rather than ambition. "Arms through the straps, remember? Like I showed you." "But I want to see the planes." "You will. As soon as we take off, you'll see all kinds of planes. But first, we have to sit still and be safe, okay?" Victoria found herself watching them for a moment longer than necessary. The father was younger than she'd initially thought, mid-30s probably, with dark hair that needed a trim and the kind of casual clothes that suggested he either didn't care about appearances or couldn't afford to. Jeans worn soft at the knees, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, scuffed sneakers that had clearly logged serious miles. His hands were careful as he adjusted his daughter's seatbelt, checking it twice before settling into his own seat. The girl had her father's dark hair but lighter eyes, hazel or green. Victoria couldn't quite tell from this distance. She wore a yellow dress with white flowers and light-up sneakers that blinked with every movement. There was something unself-consciously joyful about her, a quality Victoria couldn't remember ever possessing. She turned back to her window, dismissing the moment. Other people's lives weren't her concern. She had quarterly projections to review, a presentation to refine, 100 emails that would multiply into 1,000 if she didn't stay on top of them. The seat beside her remained empty as other passengers filed past. Victoria felt a familiar flicker of relief. An empty seat meant no forced small talk, no invasion of her carefully maintained personal space. She could work uninterrupted for the entire flight, maybe even close her eyes for 20 minutes, if her brain would finally stop racing long enough to let her rest. But then, just as the flight attendant was making her way down the aisle for a final check, the father from across the way stood up with his daughter. "I'm so sorry," he was saying to the attendant, his voice low with embarrassment. "There was a mistake with our booking. We were supposed to have 2 seats together, but the system put us in different rows. Is there any way—" The flight attendant's smile was sympathetic but firm. "Sir, we're completely full today. I'm afraid—" "Daddy, I don't want to sit by myself." The little girl's voice trembled with the kind of fear that came from being small in a very big world. "You said we'd sit together." Victoria watched the father's face cycle through frustration, resignation, and something that looked like guilt. He crouched down to his daughter's level, one hand on her shoulder. "Mia, listen to me. I'm going to be right across the aisle, okay? Right there." He pointed. "You can see me the whole time, and if you need anything at all, you just say my name and I'll be there in 2 seconds. Can you be brave for me?" The girl, Mia, nodded, but her eyes were too wide, her lower lip threatening to tremble. Victoria felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name because she'd gotten so good at not feeling anything at all. Before she could think better of it, she heard herself speaking. "Excuse me." 3 faces turned toward her, the father, the daughter, the flight attendant. Victoria gestured to the empty seat beside her. "If it helps, I'd be happy to switch with whoever is sitting across the aisle. That way they can sit together." The relief that flooded the father's face was so genuine it was almost painful to witness. "Are you sure? I don't want to—" "It's fine." Victoria was already unbuckling her seatbelt, gathering her things. "Really?" The logistics were sorted quickly. The man who had been assigned the seat next to Victoria, a businessman in his 50s who had been looking forward to flirting with the attractive CEO, though he would never have admitted it, was perfectly happy to take the window seat in exchange. 2 minutes later, Ryan Brooks and his daughter Mia were settled in 1A and 1B, and Victoria found herself in the aisle seat of row 1, across from them. "Thank you," Ryan said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he didn't say those words lightly. "Really? That was incredibly kind." Victoria waved it off, already opening her laptop again. "It's nothing. I hope you both have a good flight." She meant it as a polite dismissal, the social equivalent of closing a door. But Mia, now buckled safely beside her father, leaned forward to peer around him at Victoria. "You have pretty hair," the little girl announced with the straightforward honesty of children who haven't learned to be anything other than truthful. "It's like a princess." Victoria's hand went self-consciously to her hair, blonde, straight, cut in a sharp bob that cost $300 to maintain every 6 weeks. Nobody had called her a princess since she was approximately Mia's age. "Thank you," she said, and felt her carefully constructed professional mask slip just slightly. "Your dress is very pretty, too." Mia beamed, and Ryan gave his daughter a gentle nudge. "What do you say, sweetheart?" "Thank you." Mia's smile was gap-toothed and completely genuine. "My daddy got it for me for my birthday. I'm 6 now. I'm a big girl." 6 is very big, Victoria agreed, and meant it more than she'd expected to. At 6, Victoria had already been learning that being smart was more valuable than being loved, that achievement was the only currency that mattered, that showing vulnerability was the same as showing weakness. She wondered briefly and uncomfortably what kind of person she might have become if someone had let her be a little girl in a yellow dress with light-up shoes. The engines rumbled to life, and the flight attendant began her safety demonstration. Mia watched with rapt attention, her small hand gripping her father's arm. Ryan caught Victoria's eye and smiled apologetically. "First flight," he mouthed. Victoria nodded and returned her attention to her laptop, pulling up the presentation she'd been refining for weeks. But she found her focus fragmenting, her awareness split between the spreadsheet in front of her and the conversation happening across the aisle. "See, Mia, we're moving now. Feel that? Are we flying yet?" "Not yet. We're just getting to the runway, but soon." Very soon. Will it be scary? Maybe a tiny bit, just for a second. But I'll be right here holding your hand, and then it'll be amazing. You'll see the whole city getting smaller and smaller, like we're looking at a toy town. Victoria had flown hundreds of times, so many that the experience had long since lost any sense of wonder or meaning. It was just time to be gotten through, productivity to be extracted, distance to be covered in the pursuit of the next meeting, the next deal, the next milestone that would prove she was worthy of the space she occupied. The plane accelerated, engines screaming. Mia squeaked, half fear, half excitement, and Victoria saw Ryan squeeze his daughter's hand. "Here we go, sweetheart. You're doing so great. Look out the window. Watch everything get small." And then they were airborne, Chicago dropping away beneath them, the impossible geometry of the city shrinking into toy blocks and thread-sized streets. Victoria had seen it 1,000 times, but watching Mia's face, the pure, unfiltered wonder lighting her eyes as the ground fell away, she felt something crack in the armor she'd built around herself. "We're flying," Mia breathed, her voice hushed with awe. "Daddy, we're really flying." "We really are." Ryan's voice was soft with something Victoria couldn't name. Love, maybe, or pride. Or the particular tenderness of a parent who knew how to make magic out of ordinary moments. Victoria closed her laptop. She told herself it was just for takeoff, just until they reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign went off. She told herself she'd get back to work as soon as the plane leveled out. She told herself a lot of things that weren't quite true. The flight leveled. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers around them began moving, reaching for overhead bins, heading toward the bathrooms, settling in for the 3-hour flight. Mia had her face pressed against the window, narrating everything she saw in a steady stream of consciousness that required no responses, just her father's patient presence. Victoria opened her laptop again, stared at the screen, read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a single word. Across the aisle, Ryan was pulling things out of the backpack. A coloring book, a small bag of crayons, a juice box, a packet of crackers. Watching him, Victoria was struck by how deliberate his movements were, how carefully he'd planned for his daughter's needs. There was something almost military about his precision, though his manner was anything but rigid. "Okay, sweetheart," he said softly. "You can color for a while, and then we'll have a snack, and then maybe you can try to sleep a little bit. It's going to be a long day when we land, remember?" "I'm not tired," Mia declared, even as she rubbed her eyes with one small fist. "I'm too excited to sleep." Ryan smiled, and Victoria noticed for the first time how tired he looked. Not sleepy tired, but bone-deep exhausted. The kind of weariness that came from carrying weight that was almost too heavy to bear. She recognized it because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. She tried to return to her presentation. She really did. But her exhaustion was catching up with her, the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright for the past 18 hours finally beginning to ebb. The words on her screen blurred. Her eyes burned. The gentle hum of the engines and the warm cabin air wrapped around her like a blanket she didn't know she needed. "Just for a minute," she told herself. "I'll close my eyes for just 1 minute." Victoria Hale, CEO of Tech Vanguard, architect of a technological empire, woman who never showed weakness, leaned her head back against the seat and let her eyes drift closed. She didn't mean to fall asleep. She certainly didn't mean to tilt sideways. But somewhere over Iowa or Nebraska or one of those indistinguishable middle states, her body made a choice her conscious mind would never have permitted. She leaned across the aisle, and her head came to rest on Ryan Brooks's shoulder. Ryan felt the weight first, then the warmth. He looked down, startled, and found himself nose to nose with a sleeping CEO. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't even breathe. Across from him, Mia looked up from her coloring book and started to speak, but Ryan held a finger to his lips. "Daddy, why—" "Shh, she's sleeping, honey. Let's let her rest, okay?" Mia nodded solemnly, as if she'd been entrusted with a very important mission. Ryan should have woken her. It would have been the polite thing, the appropriate thing. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way her face had smoothed in sleep, losing the sharp edges he'd noticed earlier. Maybe it was the recognition of bone-deep exhaustion. He knew that look, had lived with it for 3 years. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just that she'd been kind to his daughter. and he'd learned that kindness was the rarest and most valuable currency in the world. So he didn't wake her. Instead, he adjusted his position slightly, making himself more comfortable so he could stay still. And then he noticed her phone in her lap, the battery icon showing 3%. Ryan had learned to travel prepared. When you were a single father working 2 jobs and raising a 6-year-old, you learned to anticipate needs before they became problems. His phone was already at 70%. He'd charged it in the terminal while Mia ate overpriced chicken nuggets. And he had a power bank in his pocket, the kind you could get for $20 at any convenience store, but which had saved him more times than he could count. Moving slowly, carefully, he reached into his pocket and extracted the power bank. Then, even more carefully, he picked up Victoria's phone from where it rested against her leg, plugged it into the power bank, and set both in the seat pocket in front of him where she'd be able to see them when she woke. Mia watched this operation with wide eyes. "Daddy, what are you doing?" "Her phone's almost dead," Ryan whispered. "She might need it when she wakes up." "That's nice," Mia said seriously, "like when I share my crayons." Exactly like that. Ryan settled back into his seat, acutely aware of the sleeping woman whose head rested against his shoulder, whose soft breathing he could feel through his shirt. It was the closest he'd been to anyone in 3 years since Emily died, and the intimacy of it, however accidental, made his chest ache. He distracted himself by looking out the window at the patchwork landscape below, the geometric precision of farmland giving way to the wrinkled brown of mountains. Somewhere down there, his life waited. The apartment that was too small, the bills that were too big, the jobs that paid too little for the hours they demanded. But up here, suspended between destinations, he could almost pretend that things were different, that he was different, that he was the kind of man who could sit comfortably beside a beautiful woman in expensive clothes and belong there. An hour passed. Mia colored her way through 3 pictures, drank her juice box, ate her crackers, and began to yawn. Ryan stroked her hair gently. "Why don't you try to sleep a little, sweetheart?" "But I want to see the mountains." "The mountains will be there when you wake up, I promise." Mia considered this with the seriousness of someone weighing a major decision. Then she nodded, curled against her father's other side, and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing had evened into the soft rhythm of sleep. Ryan sat very still, his daughter on one side and a stranger on the other, both of them trusting him enough to rest. The weight of it, the responsibility, the tenderness, the sheer improbability, made him want to laugh and cry at the same time. The flight attendant came by with the beverage cart. She looked at Ryan's situation, assessed it with experienced eyes, and smiled. "Looks like you're pinned," she said quietly. "Can I get you anything?" "Just water, please, and maybe—" He hesitated. "Maybe one of those small bottles of orange juice for when my daughter wakes up." "Of course." She handed him both, and her smile softened further when she noticed the phone charging in his seat pocket. "That's very thoughtful of you." Ryan shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." She glanced at Victoria, still sleeping soundly. Most people would have woken her up immediately. After she moved on, Ryan let himself really look at the woman whose head rested on his shoulder. Up close, he could see the details her polished exterior had hidden, the faint circles under her eyes, the tension carried in her jaw even in sleep, the thinness of her wrists that suggested meals skipped more often than eaten. She looked like someone who'd been running so long and so hard that she'd forgotten what she was running from. He recognized that too. He'd been that person once, back when he'd been someone different, back when he'd been Captain Ryan Brooks, combat pilot, adrenaline junkie. Man with a future so bright he'd needed sunglasses. Before Emily's diagnosis, before he'd learned that some battles couldn't be won with skill or courage or determination, before he'd become a widower at 32 with a 3-year-old daughter and a mountain of medical debt that no amount of military benefits could cover. These days, he worked at a community college as a maintenance technician, a fancy title for janitor, and drove for a rideshare company on weekends. He'd gone from flying multi-million-dollar aircraft to fixing broken toilets and listening to drunk passengers rate his conversation skills. The irony wasn't lost on him, but pride was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when he had Mia to raise and a future to build for her out of the rubble of everything he'd lost. Victoria stirred slightly. making a small sound of contentment in her sleep, and burrowed closer against his shoulder. Ryan found himself holding his breath, afraid to move and wake her, because there was something in this moment, something fragile and true, that he didn't want to break. The plane droned on toward Los Angeles. Mountains gave way to desert, brown and vast and beautiful in its starkness. Mia slept with her thumb in her mouth, a habit she was supposed to be breaking but which Ryan didn't have the heart to correct, not when everything else in her life had already changed so much. And Victoria slept too, for the first time in longer than she could remember, truly rested. It was another 30 minutes before she woke. The return to consciousness was gradual, gentle, like surfacing from deep water. Victoria became aware of warmth first, then the steady rumble of engines, then the uncomfortable crick in her neck. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the afternoon light filtering through the window, and found herself staring at blue flannel. She was leaning against someone. The realization hit her like ice water. Victoria jerked upright, her mind racing to understand what had happened, how long she'd been asleep, what kind of professional disaster she'd just created by literally falling asleep on a stranger. "I'm so sorry," she blurted, her face burning with embarrassment. "I didn't mean, I don't usually—" "It's okay." Ryan's voice was as warm as she remembered, with no hint of judgment. "Really, you obviously needed the rest." Victoria looked at him properly for the first time, really looked at him. In the harsh light of day and full consciousness, she saw a man roughly her age, with kind eyes and laugh lines that suggested he smiled more than she did. His clothes were simple, worn in the way that spoke of use rather than fashion. But there was something solid about him, something grounded and real that made her acutely aware of how much of her own life was performance. "How long was I asleep?" "About an hour and a half." "An hour and—" Victoria felt her mortification deepen. "I'm so sorry. That must have been incredibly uncomfortable for you." "Honestly?" Ryan's smile was gentle. "I've had worse travel companions. At least you didn't try to sell me timeshare properties or tell me about your cryptocurrency investment strategy." Despite herself, Victoria felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "The flight's not over yet. I might still launch into a pitch about blockchain technology." "Please don't. I'm still recovering from the last guy who tried to explain NFTs to me." This time, Victoria did smile, and was surprised by how foreign the expression felt on her face. When was the last time she'd smiled at something that wasn't calculated to put someone at ease or close a deal? That's when she noticed her phone. It was plugged into a power bank she didn't recognize, charging steadily, the battery now at 78%. "You—" She looked from the phone to Ryan and back again. "You plugged in my phone?" He shifted slightly, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I noticed it was almost dead. I figured you might need it when you landed. I hope that's okay. I wasn't trying to. I didn't look at anything. I just— No, it's—" Victoria felt something unfamiliar and uncomfortable moving in her chest. "That was incredibly thoughtful. Thank you." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." She said it more sharply than she intended, then softened her tone. "Sorry, I just mean, most people wouldn't have done that, especially for a stranger who fell asleep on them." Ryan shrugged, and Victoria was struck by how genuinely unconcerned he seemed with being thanked. In her world, people kept careful tallies of favors given and owed. They performed generosity for an audience, calculated kindness for maximum return. This man had done something helpful simply because it needed doing, expecting nothing in return. "I'm Victoria, by the way." She held out her hand. "Victoria Hale." His handshake was firm, his palm calloused in a way that suggested physical work. Ryan Brooks. And this? He gestured to the little girl still sleeping against his other side. "This is my daughter, Mia. She's beautiful, and much braver than I was on my first flight. I think I cried the entire time." "Don't let her fool you. She was terrified during takeoff, but she's stronger than she knows." There was something in Ryan's voice when he said it, a depth of meaning that suggested he was talking about more than just fear of flying. They fell into silence for a moment, not uncomfortable exactly, but charged with the particular awkwardness of strangers who'd shared unintentional intimacy. "So," Ryan said eventually, clearly trying to find safe conversational ground. "Los Angeles. Business or pleasure?" "Business. Tech conference, investor meetings, the usual. Victoria heard how hollow it sounded, how her life could be reduced to a string of obligations. What about you? We're visiting family. My aunt lives in Pasadena. Mia doesn't get to see her very often, so we're making the trip. That's nice. Family's important. Ryan glanced at her, and something in his expression made Victoria think he'd heard the false note in her voice, the way she'd recited the platitude without meaning it. Do you have family in L.A.? He asked. No, my parents are in Boston. We're not particularly close. Why had she said that? Victoria never shared personal information with strangers. But something about this man, his patience, his kindness, the way he'd let her sleep on his shoulder without complaint, had lowered her defenses. Before Ryan could respond, Mia stirred and opened her eyes. She sat up, blinking sleepily, and her gaze landed on Victoria. Oh, the pretty lady is awake. Hi there, Victoria said softly. Did you have a good nap? Uh-huh. I dreamed about the clouds. Are we almost there? About another hour, Ryan told her, smoothing her sleep-mussed hair. Are you hungry? Want your sandwich? As Ryan dug through the backpack for his daughter's food, Victoria noticed details she'd missed before. The backpack itself was generic, probably from Target or Walmart, with a patch sewn over a hole in the bottom. The sandwich he pulled out was in a reusable container made with care. Peanut butter and jelly on white bread, cut into triangles the way kids preferred. The apple beside it had a small bruise that had been carefully cut away. These were the choices of someone for whom money was carefully counted, thoughtfully spent. Victoria's breakfast that morning had cost $45 from her hotel's room service. Ryan had probably made his daughter's meal for less than $2. And somehow, there was more love evident in those precise triangles than in anything Victoria had eaten in years. Would you like something? Ryan asked, pulling out a second container. I always pack extra, just in case. Oh, no, I couldn't. Please. We have plenty, and you gave up your seat for us. It's the least I can do. He said it so simply, as if kindness was just a transaction where each person tried to outgive the other. Victoria took the offered granola bar, homemade, wrapped in wax paper, and felt absurdly touched by the gesture. Thank you. They ate in companionable silence, Mia narrating her thoughts on clouds and airplanes, and the very serious question of whether the snacks on the plane counted as lunch or dinner. Ryan listened to his daughter with complete attention, responding to her observations with the respect usually reserved for much more important conversations. Victoria found herself watching them, cataloging the small intimacies of their relationship, the way Mia automatically handed her father her juice box after each sip so he could hold it for her, the way Ryan knew without asking that she'd want her crayons again after she finished eating, the way they communicated in a shorthand of gestures and half-finished sentences. She's lucky to have you, Victoria said quietly when Mia had returned to her coloring book. Ryan looked surprised. I'm the lucky one. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. Still, being a single parent can't be easy. Something flickered across Ryan's face. Grief, maybe, or the memory of loss. No, it's not. But she makes it worth it, every day. Victoria wanted to ask what had happened, where Mia's mother was, but she'd been raised with enough social grace to know some questions were too invasive for a 3-hour flight with a stranger. Ryan must have seen the curiosity in her face, though, because he said, My wife died 3 years ago, cancer. I'm so sorry. Thank you. He said it without the brittleness Victoria had heard in other people when they discussed loss, as if he'd made peace with the grief even if he'd never stopped carrying it. She was extraordinary. Best person I ever knew. Mia looks like her. Victoria glanced at the little girl, seeing her with new eyes. She must have been beautiful. She was. Inside and out. Ryan's smile was sad but genuine. She made me promise I wouldn't stop living after she was gone, that I'd give Mia the best life I possibly could, so that's what I'm trying to do. Some days better than others. The honesty of it took Victoria's breath away. In her world, people guarded their vulnerabilities like classified information, showed strength even when they were breaking. This man had known her for less than 2 hours, and was talking about the worst thing that had ever happened to him with a directness that was almost frightening. What do you do? She asked, partially to change the subject, partially because she genuinely wanted to know. For work, I mean. I'm a maintenance technician at Glenwood Community College, and I drive for a rideshare company on weekends. He said it matter-of-factly, without embarrassment, though Victoria saw the tightness around his eyes that suggested pride swallowed for necessity's sake. That must keep you busy. It does, but it's steady, and it lets me be there for Mia. I work the early shift at the college, 4 to noon, so I can drop her at school and pick her up every day. The driving I do after she's asleep, few hours here and there. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Mostly. But Victoria thought about her own salary. 7 figures plus stock options, bonuses that exceeded what most people made in a year. She'd earned it, certainly. Worked impossible hours, made sacrifices, proved herself over and over in rooms full of men who wanted her to fail. But sitting here beside a man who worked 2 jobs just to give his daughter a stable life, her success felt almost obscene in its excess. "What about you?" Ryan asked. "What do you do?" For a moment, Victoria considered lying, simplifying, making herself smaller to match his humility. But something in his open gaze made her want to be honest. "I'm the CEO of a tech company, Tech Vanguard. We do software development, AI integration, that sort of thing." She watched his face for the usual reactions. Impressed but intimidated, curious but calculating, the particular look people got when they realized she might be useful to them. But Ryan just nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds challenging, and probably pretty demanding." "It is. It's—" Victoria paused, surprised to find herself on the edge of real honesty. "It's everything I thought I wanted. But sometimes I wonder if I've built something impressive at the expense of building something meaningful." The words were out before she could stop them, and she immediately wanted to take them back. She never admitted weakness, never questioned her choices, never let anyone see behind the carefully constructed facade of confidence and control. But Ryan didn't look shocked or uncomfortable. He just looked at her with those kind eyes and said, "I think a lot of people feel that way. Like they've been climbing a mountain for so long, they forgot to look up and see if it's the right mountain." "Yes," Victoria breathed, "exactly that." "For what it's worth," Ryan said slowly, "I used to be someone different, someone who thought success was measured in altitude and speed and adrenaline. I was a pilot, military, flew combat missions, the whole deal, thought I was invincible." He glanced at Mia, his expression softening. "Then life happened. And I learned that being a good father to one little girl is worth more than any mission I ever flew. It's just a different kind of success, quieter but deeper." Victoria felt something crack wider in her chest, a fissure in the armor she'd spent her entire adult life constructing. Here was a man who'd lost everything, his wife, his career, probably his sense of identity, and somehow found a way to not just survive, but to find meaning in the survival. To be at peace with a life that looked nothing like what he'd planned. She wanted to ask him how. How did you let go of who you thought you were supposed to be? How did you find contentment in the wreckage of your expectations? How did you keep showing up with kindness when the world had been so unkind to you? But before she could form the question, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Los Angeles International Airport. Please return to your seats and ensure your seat belts are fastened. Flight attendants, prepare for landing." The spell broke. Reality reasserted itself. Victoria looked at her phone, now fully charged thanks to Ryan's thoughtfulness, and saw the cascade of notifications she'd been ignoring. Emails from her VP of Operations, texts from her assistant confirming tomorrow's schedule, a missed call from her mother, which she would continue to miss. "Looks like we're almost there," Ryan said, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes." Victoria felt the weight of her responsibilities settling back onto her shoulders, like a familiar but uncomfortable coat. "Almost." Mia pressed her face against the window as Los Angeles sprawled beneath them, an endless carpet of lights and buildings and lives being lived. "Daddy, it's so big." "It is, sweetheart. Very big." They landed smoothly, the wheels touching down with barely a bump. Mia squealed with delight and relief, and Ryan laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Victoria found herself smiling too, caught up in their joy despite the heaviness settling in her chest. The plane taxied to the gate. Passengers around them began gathering their belongings. the usual chaos of disembarking. Ryan was helping Mia back into her backpack, making sure she had her coloring book, when Victoria made a decision. "Wait," she said. Could I give you my contact information?" Ryan looked up, clearly surprised. "Oh, sure, I guess. If you want. I'd like to stay in touch, if that's okay." She pulled out one of her business cards, cream card stock, embossed lettering, a small fortune spent on something most people threw away. "Email is probably better than phone. I'm not great at answering calls." Ryan took the card, studied it for a moment. Tech Vanguard, Victoria Hale, CEO. He looked at her with something that might have been concern. "You're sure? I mean, we're in pretty different worlds." "I know. Maybe that's exactly why I'd like to stay in touch." He nodded slowly, then pulled out his own phone, older model, cracked screen protector, and created a new contact. "I don't have business cards or anything, but here's my email and my number, if you ever want to call." Victoria entered the information into her phone, feeling oddly nervous about it. She'd exchanged contact information with hundreds of people, investors, clients, potential partners. But this felt different. This felt like it mattered in a way that had nothing to do with business. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For being kind about the whole falling asleep thing, for charging my phone, for..." She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate what she really meant. "For reminding me that good people exist, for showing me what actual strength looks like, for making me question everything I thought I knew about success." "No need to thank me." Ryan smiled, and it reached all the way to his eyes. "It was nice meeting you, Victoria. I hope LA treats you well." "You too. Have a wonderful time with your family." The line began moving. Passengers filed past toward the exit. Ryan hoisted Mia onto his hip. She was probably too big to be carried, but he did it anyway, and gave Victoria one last smile before joining the crowd. Victoria watched them go, father and daughter, disappearing into the masses of people all heading toward their separate lives. She felt the loss of their presence like a physical thing, as if someone had opened a window in a stuffy room and then closed it again, leaving her gasping. She gathered her belongings with mechanical precision, her mind already trying to shift into work mode. The conference, the investors, the emails, the life she'd built that suddenly felt less like an achievement and more like a cage. But as she made her way through LAX toward ground transportation, Victoria couldn't stop thinking about Ryan Brooks, about the way he'd adjusted his position so she could sleep comfortably, about the power bank that had cost him $20 but had been offered without hesitation, about the way he'd built a life out of loss and found meaning in the maintenance. Her phone buzzed with another email, then another. The demands of her empire pulling her back. She should answer them. Should dive back into the work that had always been her identity, her purpose, her escape from having to ask herself uncomfortable questions. Instead, Victoria did something she hadn't done in years. She turned off her phone, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, Victoria Hale allowed herself to feel the full weight of her loneliness. The hotel room was everything Victoria had requested: corner suite on the 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, king bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, marble bathroom with a soaking tub she'd never use. It was identical to a dozen other luxury hotel rooms in a dozen other cities, distinguished only by the particular arrangement of buildings visible through the glass and the local artwork on the walls that she never looked at closely enough to remember. She'd checked in mechanically, smiled at the concierge who'd recognized her name, accepted the upgrade she hadn't asked for but always received. Now she stood at the window, still in her travel clothes, watching Los Angeles spread itself beneath her like a promise or a threat. Somewhere in that vast sprawl of light and concrete, Ryan Brooks was probably helping his daughter brush her teeth, reading her a bedtime story, being the kind of parent Victoria's own had never been. Her phone sat on the desk where she'd placed it, still powered off. The silence it created felt both liberating and terrifying. How long had it been since she'd gone more than an hour without checking email, since she'd allowed herself to be unreachable? Victoria forced herself to turn away from the window, to unpack her carefully organized suitcase, to hang her clothes in the closet with the same precision she applied to everything else in her life. But her hands moved automatically while her mind stayed on the plane, replaying conversations, analyzing moments she couldn't quite name. She'd shared more with Ryan Brooks in 3 hours than she'd shared with anyone in years. The realization sat uncomfortably in her chest, raising questions she didn't want to examine. What did it say about her life that a stranger on a plane felt safer than the people she saw every day? That she'd rather fall asleep on someone she'd never see again than show vulnerability to anyone who might remember it? The bathroom mirror reflected a woman who looked successful by every measure that mattered in her world. Expensive clothes, flawless hair, the kind of thinness that came from forgetting to eat rather than remembering to exercise. But Victoria saw something else in her reflection, something she'd been avoiding for months or maybe years. She looked hollow, accomplished but empty, like a beautifully decorated house where nobody actually lived. She thought about Ryan's face when he'd talked about his daughter, the way it had transformed with love so pure it was almost painful to witness. When was the last time Victoria had felt that way about anything? When was the last time something in her life had mattered more than the next milestone, the next deal, the next quarter's projections? The answer came quickly and uncomfortably. Never. Victoria had been raised by parents who'd confused achievement with affection, who'd measured their daughter's worth in report cards and awards and eventually stock prices. Her father was a federal judge who'd made partnership at his firm before his 40th birthday. Her mother was a surgeon who'd published groundbreaking research on cardiovascular disease. They were brilliant, accomplished, respected. They were also emotionally distant in a way that had taught Victoria that love was conditional and success was the only currency that mattered. She'd learned the lesson well, maybe too well. The bed was comfortable, the room was quiet, but Victoria couldn't sleep. At midnight, she gave up and turned her phone back on. It exploded with notifications. 47 emails, 16 texts, 3 voicemails. She scrolled through them with growing detachment, feeling like she was reading communications meant for someone else. Her VP of operations needed approval on a vendor contract. Her CFO had questions about the quarterly budget review. Her assistant had confirmations for tomorrow's breakfast meeting, reminders about her afternoon keynote, updates on the evening networking event. All of it urgent, all of it demanding immediate attention, none of it feeling like it mattered at all. Victoria set the phone down and walked back to the window. The city below had changed, fewer lights now, the frenetic energy of day replaced by the slower pulse of night. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and allowed herself a moment of absolute honesty. She was miserable. Not in any dramatic way. Not in a way that would be visible to anyone who knew her. She was successful, wealthy, respected. She had everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed for, and she was utterly, completely miserable. The admission should have felt devastating. Instead, it felt like relief. Her phone buzzed again. Another email, this one from her mother, responding to a message Victoria had sent 3 weeks ago. The subject line was board appointment, and Victoria didn't need to open it to know the contents. Her mother had connections, had heard about an opening, thought Victoria should pursue it. Another opportunity, another achievement, another rung on a ladder that apparently had no top. Victoria deleted the email without reading it. Then, before she could second-guess the impulse, she opened her contacts and found the entry she'd created just hours earlier. Ryan Brooks. His email address was simple, unadorned, no corporate domain, no professional branding, just his name and a free email service. She opened a new message and stared at the blank screen for a long time. What did you say to someone who'd shown you kindness without expecting anything in return? How did you explain that a 3-hour flight had cracked open something you'd kept sealed for decades? Finally, she started typing. Dear Ryan, I hope this doesn't come across as strange, but I wanted to reach out and thank you again for your kindness on the flight today. I've been thinking about our conversation and about the grace with which you've rebuilt your life after unimaginable loss. I wonder if you realize how rare that is, how most people would have let grief make them bitter, but you've somehow let it make you kinder. I don't know why I'm telling you this, except that meeting you made me realize how long it's been since I've been honest with anyone, including myself. I hope you and Mia are having a wonderful time with your family. Best, Victoria. She read it 3 times, her finger hovering over the delete button. It was too personal, too revealing, too much. She barely knew this man. She had no business sharing her existential crisis with someone she'd met on a plane. But then she thought about the way he'd let her sleep on his shoulder, the way he'd charged her phone without being asked, The way he'd talked about his daughter with such unguarded love. And she pressed send before she could talk herself out of it. The email disappeared into the void of cyberspace. Victoria stared at her phone, already regretting her impulse, already composing the follow-up message where she'd apologize for the first one. Her phone buzzed. A new email. From Ryan Brooks. Victoria's heart did something complicated in her chest as she opened it. Dear Victoria, not strange at all. Actually, I'm glad you wrote. I've been thinking about our conversation too, mostly about what you said about building something impressive versus building something meaningful. I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive, but I understand the tension. After Emily died, I had to figure out what kind of life I wanted to model for Mia, what kind of man I wanted her to remember. I decided that I'd rather be someone who showed up consistently with love than someone who achieved great things at the expense of being present. That probably sounds simplistic from where you're standing, but it's the truth I live by. For what it's worth, I don't think you have to choose between success and meaning. I think you just have to be brave enough to redefine what success means to you. Easier said than done, I know. We're having a great time here. Mia's already asking when we can fly again so she can see the cloud mountains. She also asked me to tell the pretty princess lady, thank you for being nice to her daddy. Kids, don't forget kindness. Best, Ryan. Victoria read the email twice, then a third time. Something in her chest was doing strange things, expanding and contracting, hurting and healing simultaneously. When was the last time someone had spoken to her with such straightforward honesty? When was the last time someone had seen past her title and her net worth and her carefully constructed persona to address the actual human being underneath? She was 48 hours into a 72-hour trip to Los Angeles. She had a breakfast meeting in 7 hours. She should sleep. She should prepare. She should be doing any number of things that would serve her professional obligations. Instead, she wrote back. The emails continued through the night, back and forth across the digital divide between a hotel suite and what Victoria imagined was a modest guest room in Pasadena. They wrote about small things and large things, about loss and hope, and the particular challenge of living authentically in a world that rewarded performance. Ryan told her about Emily, about the 2 years between diagnosis and death, about the way he'd promised his dying wife that he would teach their daughter to be brave and kind and unafraid of joy. Victoria told him about her parents, about the childhood where achievement was the only love language spoken, about the moment she'd realized she'd built an empire but forgotten to build a life. At 3 a.m, Ryan wrote, I should probably let you get some sleep. You have a big day tomorrow. Victoria looked at the clock, startled by how much time had passed. Probably, but I haven't had a conversation this honest in longer than I can remember. Thank you for that. Any time. And Victoria, whatever you decide about your life, your company, your definition of success, I hope you'll be kind to yourself in the process. You're allowed to change your mind about what you want. You're allowed to want something different than what you thought you wanted 10 years ago. She stared at those words until they blurred. Then she typed one more message. I don't know how to do that. Be kind to myself, I mean. I don't think I ever learned. His response came quickly. Then maybe it's time to start learning. Good night, Victoria. I hope you find what you're looking for. Victoria set her phone down and finally let herself cry. Not the polite, controlled tears of someone who'd mastered her emotions, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who'd been holding everything in for so long she'd forgotten what release felt like. She cried for the girl she'd been, who'd learned that love was earned through excellence. She cried for the woman she'd become who'd achieved everything and felt nothing. She cried for the life she might have lived if someone had told her, just once, that she was enough exactly as she was. When the tears finally stopped, dawn was breaking over Los Angeles. Victoria showered, dressed in her armor of expensive clothes and perfect makeup, and went down to her breakfast meeting with venture capitalists who wanted to discuss expansion opportunities in the Asian market. She smiled at the right moments, asked the right questions, made the right impression. But some part of her remained detached, watching the performance from a distance, wondering who this woman was and whether she wanted to keep being her. The keynote went well. Standing on stage in front of 300 tech industry professionals, Victoria delivered her practice speech about innovation and disruption and the future of artificial intelligence. The audience nodded, took notes, asked questions that she answered with the authority of someone who'd spent a decade building something impressive. Afterward, people lined up to shake her hand, to exchange business cards, to suggest lunch meetings and strategic partnerships. Victoria accepted it all with professional grace while thinking about a man who drove for a rideshare company on weekends and made his daughter's sandwiches with care. The evening networking event was held on a rooftop with views of the city and an open bar serving drinks that cost more than Ryan probably made in a day. Victoria circulated through the crowd, engaging in the particular dance of professional networking, showing interest without seeming desperate, demonstrating expertise without appearing arrogant, being memorable without being controversial. She was talking to a potential client about cloud infrastructure when her phone buzzed with a new email. She ignored it, maintaining eye contact and engagement, doing what she'd always done. But when there was a natural pause in the conversation, she glanced at her screen. Ryan Brooks. Subject line, "Thought you might need this." She excused herself to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall like a teenager hiding from the world, and opened the email. "Hey Victoria, I hope your day went well. Mia and I spent the afternoon at the Huntington Gardens, and I thought of you. Not because you seem like a garden person particularly, but because there was this moment where Mia was running through the Japanese garden, and she stopped dead in her tracks in front of this little bridge. Just stood there, staring at the koi and the pond beneath it, completely transfixed. And I thought about what you said about forgetting to build a life while you were building an empire. Sometimes I think we all need to be more like kids, willing to stop dead in our tracks when we see something beautiful, willing to be transfixed. Anyway, I know you're probably in the middle of important meetings and networking and all the things that come with being a CEO, but I wanted to remind you that it's okay to stop and look at the koi sometimes, even if only for a minute. Take care of yourself. Ryan." Victoria sat in the bathroom stall of an exclusive rooftop venue, surrounded by the muffled sounds of professional success, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd spent her entire adult life running, building, achieving, proving. She'd confused motion with progress, exhaustion with purpose, accomplishment with fulfillment. She'd become so good at performing success that she'd forgotten to ask herself whether the performance made her happy. And then a stranger on a plane had shown her what it looked like to live differently, to choose presence over prestige, to measure success by the quality of your relationships rather than the size of your accomplishments. To stop and look at the koi. Victoria typed her response carefully, choosing each word with more care than she'd applied to any business communication in years. "Ryan, I'm sitting in a bathroom stall at a networking event, hiding from a room full of people who want something from me, reading your email and trying not to cry. You have this way of seeing straight through all my defenses to the parts of myself I've been trying to ignore. I don't know how to stop and look at the koi. I don't know how to be transfixed. I don't know how to want something other than the next achievement, the next milestone, the next proof that I matter. But I think I want to learn. I think maybe I need to learn. Thank you for reminding me that there's another way to live, that it's possible to rebuild after everything falls apart, that small moments of beauty matter as much as big moments of triumph. I don't know what I'm going to do with that information yet, but I wanted you to know that it matters, that you matter. Victoria." She sent the email, washed her face, reapplied her lipstick, and returned to the party. But something had changed. Some essential switch had been flipped. She could feel herself going through the motions, smiling, talking, networking, while simultaneously standing outside herself, observing the performance with new eyes. At 11 o'clock, Victoria did something she'd never done before at a professional event. She left early. Just walked out. Ignored the surprised looks from colleagues who were used to her staying until the last possible moment, collecting every last business card, maximizing every opportunity. Back in her hotel room, she found 3 new emails from Ryan. The first was a photo of Mia standing on the Japanese bridge, arms spread wide, face tilted toward the sun. The second was a picture of koi, orange and white and gold, swimming in lazy circles. The third was just text. "Mia wanted you to see what we saw today. She said maybe it will help you remember to smile. Kids are wise like that." Victoria saved both photos to her phone. Then she did something she hadn't done since college. She opened her laptop, pulled up a blank document, and started writing. Not a business plan or a strategic memo or a presentation outline, just thoughts, feelings, questions she'd been too afraid to ask herself. What do I actually want? Who am I when I'm not performing? What would my life look like if I redesigned it around meaning instead of achievement? What am I so afraid of? The last question was the hardest. Victoria stared at it for a long time before she finally typed the answer. I'm afraid that if I stop achieving, if I stop proving myself, if I stop climbing, I'll discover that there's nothing underneath. That I've built my entire identity on accomplishment because I have no idea who I am without it. That I'm not actually interesting or valuable or worthy of love if I'm not successful. That my parents were right to withhold affection until I earned it, because there was nothing in me worth loving unconditionally. Seeing the words on screen felt like standing naked in front of a mirror, vulnerable and uncomfortable and absolutely necessary. Her phone rang. Victoria glanced at the screen, saw her mother's name, and for the first time in her adult life, she declined the call. Then she typed a text message. Mom, I'm in the middle of something. Can we talk next week? The response came within seconds. This is important. I have a contact at Waverly who mentioned... Victoria didn't read the rest. She closed the message, opened a new one, and typed before she could talk herself out of it. Mom, I need to tell you something. I'm not interested in the Waverly opportunity or any other board appointment right now. I'm taking some time to figure out what I actually want rather than what I think I should want. I hope you can respect that. I love you. She pressed send and immediately felt her heart start racing. Her mother wouldn't understand. Would probably call back immediately. Would use logic and reason and disappointment to explain why Victoria was making a mistake. Would remind her that opportunities like this didn't come along often, that she had to think about her career trajectory, that pausing meant falling behind. But her phone stayed silent. Victoria waited, anxiety building, preparing for the confrontation. When it still hadn't come after 20 minutes, she let herself imagine something different. Maybe her mother was also sitting somewhere, staring at her phone, wondering how to respond to a daughter who'd finally said no. Maybe this small act of boundary setting was the beginning of something new. Or maybe it would just be another disappointment in a long line of disappointments. But at least this time, Victoria would be disappointing her mother by choosing herself, rather than disappointing herself by choosing obligation. Her laptop pinged with another email. Ryan Brooks again. Victoria, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to say something. I've watched a lot of people over the past few years during Emily's illness, after she died, as I tried to rebuild. And I've learned that there are two kinds of courage. The first kind is the courage to keep climbing, to keep achieving, to keep pushing yourself to be more and do more. That's the courage everyone celebrates. But the second kind, the courage to stop, to question, to admit that you might be climbing the wrong mountain, that's rarer and harder, and often lonelier. It sounds like you're finding that second kind of courage. I just wanted to tell you that I think that's brave, even if it doesn't feel like it right now, especially if it doesn't feel like it right now. Okay, enough unsolicited wisdom from a janitor who drives for a ride-share company. Get some sleep. Take care. Ryan. Victoria read the email 3 times, letting each word sink in. Then she wrote back. Ryan, you're not overstepping. You're saying exactly what I needed to hear. I've spent my whole life practicing the first kind of courage, the kind that earns applause and recognition. But you're right that the second kind is harder. It feels less like courage and more like free-falling without a parachute. I don't know where I'll land, but I think I have to jump anyway. Thank you for seeing me, for being honest, for reminding me that there are people in the world who measure success differently. I don't know what happens next, but I wanted you to know that meeting you changed something fundamental in me. For better or worse, I'm not the same person who boarded that plane in Chicago. I hope that's a good thing. Victoria. She sent the email, closed her laptop, and finally let herself sleep. The next morning, Victoria woke to sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows and the distant sound of traffic 32 floors below. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the obligations awaiting her, forgot everything except the unusual sensation of having slept through the night without waking every hour to check her phone. Then reality reasserted itself. She had a flight back to San Francisco in 6 hours. She had meetings scheduled for Monday morning. She had an empire to run, expectations to meet, a reputation to maintain. But something was different. Victoria could feel it in the way she moved through her morning routine, in the way she looked at herself in the mirror, in the way she thought about the day ahead. She was still the same person, same body, same responsibilities, same life. But the lens through which she viewed it all had shifted. Her phone showed a new email from Ryan, sent at 6 in the morning. "Good morning, Victoria. Mia woke me up at dawn because she wanted to see the sunrise from my aunt's backyard. I've watched 1,000 sunrises. Military training will do that to you, but this one was different. Because Mia kept saying, 'Look, Daddy, look at all the colors.' And I realized I'd been watching sunrises for years without really seeing them, just checking them off a list, noting the time, moving on to the next thing. Sometimes it takes a 6-year-old to remind you that beauty requires attention, that seeing requires stopping. I hope your morning is full of colors you actually notice. Ryan." Victoria set down her phone and walked to the window. Los Angeles spread beneath her, the city golden in the morning light, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she just looked. Didn't think about her schedule or her obligations or what she should be doing. Just stood there and watched the way light transformed concrete and glass into something almost beautiful. Her phone buzzed again. Her assistant, confirming the car service to the airport. Victoria typed back quickly. "Please cancel the car. I'm going to take a rideshare instead." The response was immediate. "Are you sure? Your usual car service is already—" "I'm sure. Thank you." Victoria finished packing, checked out of the hotel, and requested a ride through the app on her phone. When the car arrived, she slid into the back seat and gave the driver, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle smile, the address for Pasadena. "Pasadena?" The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "The airport's the other direction, hun." "I know. I need to make a stop first. I promise I'll still make it worth your while." The driver shrugged and pulled away from the curb. As they drove, Victoria watched the city transform around them. Downtown's glass towers giving way to neighborhoods with actual trees and front yards and evidence of human life. She'd been to Los Angeles dozens of times and had never really seen it, had only experienced the narrow corridor between airport and hotel and conference center. Her phone rang. Her VP of operations. She declined the call and sent a text. "In meetings all morning, we'll call you this afternoon." It wasn't entirely a lie. She was about to have a meeting, just not the kind her VP would recognize as legitimate business. The house in Pasadena was exactly what Victoria had imagined, small but well-maintained, with a tidy front garden and a porch swing that had clearly seen years of use. She paid the driver generously, asking her to wait, and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, gathering her courage. This was insane. She barely knew this man. She had a flight to catch, responsibilities waiting, an entire company depending on her presence and leadership. What was she doing here? But even as the logical part of her brain cataloged all the reasons this was inappropriate and unprofessional, Victoria was already walking up the path to the front door. She was raising her hand to knock when the door opened and Ryan Brooks stood there, barefoot and surprised, with Mia peeking around his legs. "Victoria?" "Hi." Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "I'm sorry to just show up like this. I know it's strange. I was going to the airport and I realized I couldn't leave without—" She didn't know how to finish the sentence. Without what? Without seeing him again? Without thanking him properly? Without understanding why this man and his daughter had cracked something open inside her that she'd kept sealed for decades? Ryan's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. He stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in, please." Victoria stepped across the threshold into a world completely foreign to her own. The house was small. Her hotel suite had probably been larger, but it radiated something her penthouse apartment had never managed to achieve. Warmth. The kind that came from actual living rather than professional staging. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator in the kitchen she could see from the entryway. A worn couch faced a modest television, and books were stacked on every available surface. Picture books with bright covers, novels with cracked spines, a physics textbook that looked like it had survived a war. The air smelled like coffee and something sweet, maybe pancakes, and there was a light-up shoe abandoned in the middle of the floor that Mia immediately retrieved with an embarrassed giggle. "Sorry," Ryan said, watching Victoria take it all in. "We weren't expecting company. It's my aunt's place, and she's at work. If I'd known you were coming, No, it's... Victoria searched for the right word. Perfect wasn't accurate. Neither was nice. It feels like a home. Ryan studied her face for a moment, seeming to understand the weight behind those simple words. Come sit down. Can I get you some coffee? That would be wonderful. Mia had retreated to the couch but kept sneaking glances at Victoria, her eyes wide with the kind of amazement usually reserved for minor celebrities or really impressive birthday cakes. Ryan disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with 2 mugs, handing one to Victoria before settling into a chair across from her. So, he said gently, what brings you to Pasadena when you should be heading to the airport? Victoria wrapped her hands around the warm mug, buying herself time. What was she doing here? How did you explain to someone that a 3-hour flight and a handful of emails had fundamentally altered your understanding of your own life? I don't really know, she admitted. After our emails last night, after everything we talked about, I woke up this morning and realized I couldn't just go back to San Francisco and pretend nothing had changed. But I also don't know what has changed exactly, or what I'm supposed to do about it. That's a start, Ryan said. Knowing something needs to change even when you don't know what that looks like yet. Is it? Because mostly it just feels terrifying. Victoria took a sip of coffee to steady herself. I've spent my entire adult life building Tech Vanguard. It's not just what I do, it's who I am. And now I'm sitting here wondering if I've built my whole identity around something that doesn't actually make me happy, and I don't know who I am without it. Mia had been coloring quietly at the coffee table, but she looked up at this, her child's intuition sensing the emotional weight of the conversation. Are you sad? She asked Victoria directly. The question was so simple, so honest, that it bypassed all of Victoria's carefully constructed defenses. Yes, sweetheart, I think I am. My daddy gets sad sometimes too, Mia said matter-of-factly, about mommy being in heaven. But then we talk about happy things and do happy things, and it gets better. Maybe you need to do happy things too. Ryan's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. That's very wise, Mia. Can you go play in your room for a little bit while Victoria and I talk about grown-up stuff? Mia nodded seriously, gathering her crayons and coloring book. Okay, but Victoria, you should stay for lunch. Daddy makes really good grilled cheese. I'd like that, Victoria found herself saying, if it's not too much trouble. After Mia had disappeared down the hallway, Ryan turned his attention back to Victoria. She's right, you know, about doing happy things. It sounds simplistic, but sometimes the answer really is that simple. What makes you happy, Victoria? The question hung in the air between them. Victoria opened her mouth to answer and found she had nothing to say. What did make her happy? Closing a deal? Seeing her company's stock price rise? Reading positive press about her leadership? None of those things felt like happiness. They felt like relief, temporary, fleeting relief from the constant pressure to prove herself. I don't know, she whispered. Isn't that pathetic? I'm 38 years old and I don't know what makes me happy. It's not pathetic, it's honest. Ryan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression earnest. Can I tell you something? When Emily was sick, really sick near the end, she made me promise her something. She said, don't let grief steal your life. Don't spend the next 40 years just existing, just going through the motions. I need you to promise me you'll figure out what brings you joy and you'll pursue it, even when it's hard, even when it feels selfish, even when it would be easier to just keep your head down and survive. And I promised her, even though I had no idea how to keep that promise. Victoria felt tears pricking at her eyes. How did you do it? Keep the promise? I started small, really small. First few months after she died, I was just trying to keep Mia fed and myself functional. But then one morning, Mia asked if we could make pancakes like Mommy used to make. And we did. And it was messy and imperfect, and Mia got batter everywhere, and for about 10 minutes, I wasn't drowning in grief. I was just making pancakes with my daughter. He paused, his gaze distant, remembering. After that, I started looking for more of those moments, reading to Mia at night, taking walks in our neighborhood, learning to braid her hair, even though I was terrible at it. Small things that didn't fix anything, but made life feel like something more than just survival. And eventually, those small moments added up to something bigger. Not happiness exactly, not the uncomplicated kind I had before Emily got sick, but meaning, purpose, a life worth living. I don't have anyone depending on me like Mia depends on you, Victoria said. I don't have those built-in reasons to find joy. What if I'm just fundamentally broken? What if I've spent so long optimizing for achievement that I've lost the ability to feel anything else? I don't believe that. Ryan's voice was firm but kind. I think you've just been practicing the wrong things. You've mastered achievement and success and strategic thinking. Those are skills. Happiness is also a skill. Joy is a skill. Presence is a skill. You just need to practice them. I wouldn't even know where to start. Start with what brought you here this morning. Ryan gestured around the modest living room. You had a flight to catch, work waiting for you, every logical reason to head straight to the airport. But you came here instead. Why? Victoria considered the question carefully. Because, for the first time in as long as I can remember, I wanted something more than I feared the consequences of wanting it. Because sitting on that plane next to you and Mia, watching the way you loved her, the way you'd rebuilt your life around what actually mattered, it made me realize how empty mine is. And I couldn't go back to that emptiness without at least trying to understand what the alternative might look like. That's not nothing, Victoria. That's everything. That's the first step. But what's the second step? What do I do with this realization? I can't just quit my job and burn my life down. I have responsibilities, people depending on me, investors who trust me with their money. I can't just walk away because I had an existential crisis on a plane. Ryan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I don't think you have to burn everything down. But maybe you need to examine what you've built and ask yourself what's worth keeping and what's just inertia. When I lost Emily, I had to let go of my entire identity as a pilot. That felt like dying. But it also created space for me to become someone new. Someone better, maybe. Not better at flying or achieving or impressing people, but better at being present. Better at love. Better at the things that actually matter when you're lying on your deathbed taking inventory of your life. The words settled over Victoria like a weight and a relief simultaneously. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared that if I start questioning everything, if I start trying to change, I'll lose what I have and not find anything to replace it with. At least right now I know who I am, even if that person is miserable. What if I try to become someone else and just end up more lost? That's a legitimate fear. But can I ask you something? What's scarier, the possibility of getting lost while trying to find something real, or the certainty of staying exactly where you are for the next 40 years? Victoria didn't need to think about her answer. Staying where I am. Definitely staying where I am. Then you already know what you need to do. You just need to find the courage to do it. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling around them. From down the hall, they could hear Mia singing softly to herself, some song Victoria didn't recognize, but which sounded like pure, uncomplicated joy. Tell me about Emily, Victoria said suddenly. What was she like? Ryan's face transformed, grief and love mingling in his expression. She was the kind of person who made everyone around her better, not in a loud or obvious way. She was quiet, actually. Worked as a librarian, loved poetry and old movies, and making elaborate dinners from recipes she found in secondhand cookbooks. She had this way of seeing people, really seeing them, Like she could look past all the performance and pretense straight to the heart of who you actually were. She sounds extraordinary. She was. And the thing is, she wasn't trying to be. She didn't have some grand philosophy or strategic approach to life. She paid attention to people, to moments, to the small, beautiful things most of us rush past. And she taught me to do that too. Taught me that you could live a meaningful life without achieving anything impressive by conventional standards. Victoria felt something crack wider in her chest. I think that's what I'm most afraid of, that meaning requires obscurity, that if I step away from achievement, I'll just disappear, that nobody will care about me or remember me or think I matter. Is that what you think about Emily? That because she wasn't famous or rich or conventionally successful, her life didn't matter? Of course not. She clearly mattered enormously to you and Mia and everyone who knew her. Exactly. She mattered in the ways that actually count. and the impact she had on real people's real lives. Not in headlines or stock prices or Wikipedia entries. In hearts. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. I'm not saying achievement is bad or that success is meaningless, but I think we confuse the scoreboard with the game. The point of life isn't to die with the highest score. It's to die having actually played, having loved and been loved, having been present for the moments that matter, having made someone's day better just by being in it. You're making me want to quit my job and become a librarian, Victoria said, managing a weak smile through the tears that had started falling without her permission. Ryan laughed softly. You don't have to quit your job. You just have to figure out how to do it differently, or why you're doing it, or whether the version of success you're chasing is actually your definition or someone else's that you internalized so long ago you forgot it wasn't yours. Before Victoria could respond, Mia appeared in the doorway, her face serious. Daddy, Victoria is crying. Should I get her a tissue? That would be very kind, sweetheart. Mia disappeared and returned moments later with an entire box of tissues, which she solemnly presented to Victoria. Here, Daddy says it's okay to cry, that it means you're feeling big feelings, and big feelings are important. Victoria accepted the tissues, overwhelmed by this child's simple wisdom. Thank you, Mia. You're very thoughtful. You're welcome. Do you still want grilled cheese for lunch? Because Daddy makes them really good with butter on both sides of the bread. It's a secret trick. I definitely still want grilled cheese. Mia beamed and turned to her father. Can I help? Of course you can. Go wash your hands and meet me in the kitchen. As Mia skipped off, Ryan stood and extended a hand to Victoria. Come on, sometimes the best therapy is making lunch with a 6-year-old who takes sandwich construction very seriously. Victoria let him pull her to her feet, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell whatever simple soap he used, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The air between them felt charged with something she couldn't quite name. Not romance exactly, though there was an element of that. More like recognition. Like two people who'd been lost in different ways, finding each other at exactly the right moment. Thank you, she said quietly, for not making me feel crazy for showing up here, for being honest with me, for seeing me. Thank you for being brave enough to show up. That took courage. In the kitchen, Mia had already pulled a step stool up to the counter and was waiting with poorly concealed excitement. Ryan gathered ingredients, bread, cheese, butter, and began directing operations with the patience of someone who understood that the process mattered more than the product. Okay, Mia, you're in charge of cheese distribution. 2 slices per sandwich, making sure they cover the whole piece of bread. Victoria, you're on butter duty. Spread it on the outside of the bread. That's the secret. And I'll handle the actual grilling because the stove is hot. Victoria found herself standing at a kitchen counter in Pasadena, spreading butter on bread while a 6-year-old narrated her cheese placement strategy and a former combat pilot supervised with gentle authority. It was perhaps the most domestic moment of her adult life, and it felt simultaneously bizarre and absolutely right. You're doing great, Ryan told her, his voice warm with amusement. Very even butter distribution. I'm a fast learner, Victoria said, surprised to find herself smiling genuinely. Though I should probably tell you, I haven't made a grilled cheese sandwich since I was maybe 10 years old. Really? What do you eat? Hotel food? Restaurant food? Things my assistant orders and has delivered to my office. Nothing that requires actual cooking. Mia looked up from her cheese arrangement, clearly shocked. You don't cook? But cooking is fun, and you need food to live. You make an excellent point, Mia. I should probably learn to cook. Daddy can teach you. He's the best cooker in the whole world. Ryan laughed, flipping the first sandwich in the pan with practiced ease. I don't know about the whole world, but I can definitely teach you the basics. It's not as hard as you might think, just requires paying attention. That seems to be a theme today, Victoria said. Paying attention, being present, actually experiencing life instead of just achieving through it. It's the theme most of us need to learn at some point. Ryan plated the first sandwich and started on the second. Some of us just get the lesson more dramatically than others. They ate lunch at a small table that barely fit 3 chairs, Mia chattering between bites about her favorite things in Pasadena, about the garden they'd visited, about how airplanes worked and whether they could go on another one soon. Victoria found herself genuinely engaged in the conversation, asking follow-up questions, laughing at Mia's observations about the world, feeling something in her chest slowly unknotting. When was the last time she'd eaten a meal without simultaneously checking her phone or reviewing documents or thinking about her next meeting? When was the last time she'd been fully present for anything? After lunch, Mia asked if Victoria wanted to see her room, and Ryan nodded his permission. Victoria followed the little girl down the narrow hallway to a small bedroom that had clearly been set up temporarily for their visit. A twin bed with a yellow comforter, a nightstand with a small lamp, and against one wall, a carefully organized collection of toys and books. "This is my special shelf," Mia announced proudly, gesturing to a low bookcase. "Daddy made it for me. He makes things with wood sometimes. He's really good at it." Victoria examined the shelf more closely and realized it was handcrafted, the joints careful and precise, the wood sanded smooth and stained a warm honey color. "Your daddy made this? It's beautiful. He makes lots of things. He says it helps him think. He made me a dollhouse too, but it's at our real home." Mia pulled out a book with a worn cover. "This was my mommy's favorite book. Daddy reads it to me every night. Do you want to see?" Victoria accepted the book carefully, recognizing the title, a classic children's story about a velveteen rabbit who becomes real through being loved. The pages were soft from repeated readings, and in the margin of the first page someone had written in feminine handwriting, "To my Mia, who makes everything real. Love, Mommy." "This is very special," Victoria said, her throat tight. "Your mommy must have loved you very much. Daddy says she loved me more than anything in the whole world, more than all the stars in the sky. But she got sick and had to go to heaven. Daddy says it's okay to be sad about it, but also okay to be happy remembering the good parts." The simple wisdom of a child who'd learned too young about loss and resilience. Victoria handed the book back carefully, aware she was holding something precious, something that represented everything she'd never had: unconditional love, genuine connection, the kind of security that came from knowing someone valued you for existing rather than achieving. "Your daddy is very wise." "I know." Mia hugged the book to her chest. "He's the best daddy in the world. Are you going to be his friend? Because I think he needs more friends. He mostly just works and takes care of me and doesn't have a lot of time for other grown-ups." Victoria felt her heart twist. "I'd like to be his friend if he'd like that too." "He would. I can tell. He smiles different when you're here, like he's happy but also a little bit nervous. That's what he looked like when he used to pick Mommy up for dates, in the pictures." Before Victoria could process this revelation, Ryan appeared in the doorway. "Mia, are you telling Victoria all our secrets?" "Just the important ones." Mia grinned, clearly proud of herself. "Why don't you go watch TV for a bit? I need to talk to Victoria about grown-up things." Once Mia had settled in the living room with a cartoon, Ryan led Victoria out to the small backyard. It was modest but peaceful, with a wooden bench under a tree and flower beds that someone had tended with care. They sat down, and for a moment neither spoke, just listened to the sounds of the neighborhood: distant traffic, a dog barking, children playing somewhere nearby. "I should probably tell you something," Ryan said finally. "I wasn't entirely honest earlier about why I didn't wake you up on the plane." Victoria turned to look at him, curious. "What do you mean?" "I said it was because you needed rest, because I recognized exhaustion, and that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "The whole truth is that sitting there with you leaning against me, feeling like someone trusted me enough to be vulnerable, even accidentally, it was the first time since Emily died that I felt something other than grief or responsibility. And I didn't want it to end." Victoria's breath caught. "Ryan, I'm not telling you this to make things complicated or to put pressure on you. I know we barely know each other. I know you have a whole life in San Francisco and I have a whole life here. But I also think maybe we found each other at exactly the right time. Maybe you needed to meet someone who'd learned that life doesn't end when your plans fall apart. And maybe I needed to meet someone who reminded me that it's possible to want something more than just getting through the day." "I don't know what to do with this," Victoria whispered. "With any of this. I came here because I couldn't not come here. But I don't know what happens next. I have a flight to catch. I have a company to run. I have a life that's waiting for me even though I'm not sure I want it anymore. Then don't decide right now. Don't try to figure out the whole future in one afternoon. Just stay a little longer. Let yourself be present for this moment without worrying about what comes after. Victoria looked at this man who'd lost everything and somehow found a way to keep his heart open, who worked 2 jobs to raise his daughter alone and still had the capacity to see a stranger's pain and offer comfort. She thought about her empty apartment in San Francisco, about her calendar full of obligations that felt meaningless, about the life she'd built that looked impressive from the outside but felt hollow from within. And she made a choice. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay." She pulled out her phone and, hands trembling slightly, opened her email to compose a message to her assistant. "Something has come up. Cancel my flight. Clear my calendar for Monday. I'll be out of the office. We'll check email periodically, but not available for calls." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Ryan watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, concern, something that might have been hope. "Are you sure? I don't want you to make any decisions you'll regret." "I'm not sure about anything right now, but I'm sure that if I get on that plane without figuring out what this is, what I'm feeling, what's changing, what any of this means, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." "What are you feeling?" Victoria took a deep breath, reaching for honesty that felt dangerous and necessary. "Terrified. Hopeful. More alive than I've been in years. Like I'm standing on the edge of something, and I can either step back to safety or jump and see what happens. And for the first time in my adult life, I want to jump more than I want to be safe." Ryan reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "Then jump. I'll catch you if you fall." "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave even when you don't feel brave. I know you're capable of change even when it's hard. I know you showed up here today, even though every logical part of your brain probably told you it was crazy. That counts for something." Victoria looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between her manicured nails and his work-worn fingers, at the way they fit together despite coming from such different worlds. What if this is a mistake? What if I'm just having some kind of breakdown and I'm dragging you into it? Then we'll figure it out together. But Victoria, I don't think this is a breakdown. I think this is a breakthrough. I think you're finally letting yourself feel what you've been avoiding for years. That's not crazy. That's human. From inside the house, they could hear Mia singing along to whatever show she was watching, her voice high and pure and completely unself-conscious. The sound was so different from anything in Victoria's usual environment. No strategic meetings, no calculated conversations, no performance of competence. Just a child being a child, expressing joy without worrying about how it looked or what it meant or whether it was appropriate. "Teach me," Victoria said suddenly. "Teach me how to do what you do, how to be present, how to find meaning in ordinary moments, how to build a life around what matters instead of what impresses people. It's not something you can learn in a weekend. I know, but it's something I can start learning, and I have to start somewhere." Ryan squeezed her hand gently. "Okay, then here's lesson 1. Stop thinking about what you should be doing and just be here, right now, in this moment, not planning or strategizing or worrying, just here." Victoria closed her eyes and tried to quiet the voice in her head that was already composing explanations for her assistant, already planning damage control, already 3 steps ahead of the present moment. She focused on the sensation of sun on her face, on the sound of birds in the tree above them, on the warmth of Ryan's hand in hers, on the way the air smelled like cut grass and possibility. For maybe 30 seconds, she managed it. 30 seconds of pure presence, of being exactly where she was without trying to be somewhere else. And in those 30 seconds, Victoria felt something she couldn't remember ever feeling before. Peace. It didn't last. Within a minute, her brain had kicked back into planning mode, already trying to figure out how to extend this moment, how to make it permanent, how to achieve the thing she'd just experienced. But she'd felt it. She'd proven to herself that it was possible. She opened her eyes to find Ryan watching her with a small smile. "See? You can do it." For about 30 seconds before my brain took over again. That's 29 seconds longer than most people manage on their first try. You'll get better with practice. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, and Victoria felt some of the tension she'd been carrying for years slowly beginning to release. She didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know how this decision would affect her company, her reputation, her carefully constructed life. But for the first time in as long as she could remember, she wasn't letting fear of the unknown stop her from reaching for something real. Her phone buzzed, her assistant responding to the cancellation request with barely concealed panic. "Is everything okay? Do you need me to reschedule the Monday meetings? Should I send someone to check on you?" Victoria typed back quickly. "Everything is fine, just need some personal time. We'll be in touch tomorrow with more details." She set the phone face down on the bench and looked at Ryan. "So, what does one do with an unexpected afternoon in Pasadena?" "Well," Ryan said, his smile widening, "if you're looking to practice being present, Mia has been asking if we can go to the park. There's one a few blocks away with swings and a really good view of the mountains. Very koi in the pond energy, if you know what I mean." Victoria laughed, a real laugh, spontaneous and genuine. "That sounds perfect." And just like that, Victoria Hale, CEO of Tech Vanguard, woman who'd spent 15 years optimizing every moment for productivity, found herself spending a Sunday afternoon at a neighborhood park, pushing a 6-year-old on a swing while her father watched with quiet joy, and feeling more successful than she'd ever felt closing a $1 million deal. The park was nothing special by any objective measure. A few acres of grass and playground equipment, worn benches scattered under trees, a basketball court where teenagers were running drills with the kind of intensity that suggested college scholarships hung in the balance. But as Victoria walked beside Ryan while Mia skipped ahead, light-up shoes blinking with each step, she felt something shift in her perception. This was what she'd been missing. Not grand experiences or impressive destinations, but the simple pleasure of an afternoon with nowhere urgent to be. Mia made a beeline for the swings, climbing onto one and looking back expectantly. "Push me, Daddy! Push me high!" Ryan glanced at Victoria. "You mind?" "Not at all. I'll watch and learn." She settled onto a nearby bench, pulling out her phone more from habit than intention. The screen lit up with notifications, emails from her leadership team, text messages from colleagues, a missed call from her CFO. Her first instinct was to respond immediately, to reassure everyone that she hadn't disappeared or had a breakdown or made any rash decisions. But then she remembered Ryan's words. "Stop thinking about what you should be doing and just be here." Victoria silenced her phone and slipped it back into her pocket. Then she looked up and watched Ryan push his daughter on the swing, the easy rhythm of their interaction speaking to years of practice, to a relationship built on showing up consistently for small moments like this one. Each time Mia swung forward, she shrieked with delight, and each time she swung back, Ryan was there, hands ready, completely focused on this one simple task. "Higher, Daddy! I want to touch the sky." "You're already pretty high, sweetheart. Much higher, and you'll launch into orbit." "I want to go to orbit, like an astronaut," Ryan laughed, giving her another push. "Maybe someday you will. You can be anything you want to be, remember?" Victoria felt something twist in her chest. She'd heard those words before. Her parents had said them often enough. But they'd always meant something different. You can be anything you want to be, as long as what you want to be is impressive, as long as it comes with accolades and achievement, as long as we can be proud of you at dinner parties. Ryan's words carried no such conditions. He meant them literally, completely. Mia could be an astronaut, or an artist, or a teacher, or anything else, and he would support her with the same unwavering presence he showed right now, pushing her on a swing on a Sunday afternoon. After a while, Mia decided she'd had enough of the swings and wanted to try the monkey bars. Ryan helped her reach the first rung, then stood beneath her, hands ready to catch her if she fell, offering encouragement without pressure. "That's it, Mia. One hand, then the other. You've got this." Mia made it 3 rungs before her grip slipped. Ryan caught her easily, setting her gently on the ground. "Good try, sweetheart. That's one more than last time. I want to try again." "Of course. As many times as you want." Victoria watched this scene repeat itself, Mia trying, sometimes making it a bit further, sometimes falling sooner, Ryan always there to catch her, always offering the same steady encouragement. And she realized this was what unconditional support actually looked like. Not praise for achievement, but presence, regardless of outcome. Not love earned through success, but love offered freely, without expectation. Eventually, Ryan made his way back to the bench where Victoria sat. Mia had found another little girl to play with and was deep in the serious business of building an elaborate game involving sticks and imagination. "She's exhausting," Ryan said, but his tone was full of affection, in the best possible way. "She's wonderful. You're doing an incredible job with her." "Thanks. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. But then she'll say something wise beyond her years, or show kindness to a stranger, or laugh at something silly, and I think maybe I'm not completely screwing this up." Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching Mia play. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "How do you do it? How do you not resent what you lost? Your career, your wife, the life you thought you'd have? How do you stay present and grateful when so much was taken from you?" Ryan leaned back against the bench, his gaze distant. "You want the honest answer or the inspirational answer?" "The honest one." "Okay. Honestly, some days I do resent it. Some days I wake up angry at the universe for taking Emily, for leaving me to raise Mia alone, for forcing me to give up everything I'd worked for. Some days I see guys I served with, guys who are still flying, still living the life I thought would be mine, and I feel bitter about it." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "But here's what I've learned. Resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't bring Emily back or give me my career back. It just makes me miserable and unavailable to Mia, who needs me more than I need to be right about how unfair life is." "So you just decided to stop being angry?" "No. I decided to be angry and grateful at the same time, to hold both truths. Yes, it's unfair that Emily died at 32. Yes, it's hard to work 2 jobs and raise a kid alone. Yes, I gave up a career I loved. But also, yes, I got 6 years with an extraordinary woman. Yes, I have a daughter who makes every hard day worthwhile. Yes, I've learned things about strength and love and presence that I never would have learned if everything had gone according to plan." Victoria felt tears threatening again. "I don't know if I could do that. Hold both at once like that. You're already doing it. You're sitting here feeling grief for the life you built that doesn't fulfill you, and also feeling hope for the possibility of something different. That's holding both truths." Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed insistently. She pulled it out, intending to silence it, but the name on the screen made her pause. David Winters, her VP of Operations, and the person she trusted most in her leadership team. He wouldn't call unless something was genuinely wrong. She looked at Ryan apologetically. "I'm sorry. I should take this. It might be important." "Of course, take your time." Victoria walked a few steps away and answered. "David, what's wrong?" "Victoria, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day." David's voice was tight with stress. "We have a situation, the Singapore deal. They're threatening to walk. They want to talk to you directly, and they want to talk now. If we lose this contract, it's going to seriously impact our Q2 projections." Victoria felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. Singapore deal, Q2 projections, crisis management. This was her world, her expertise, the thing she'd built her identity around for 15 years. She could handle this. She should handle this. It was her responsibility. "What's their concern?" she asked, already mentally shifting into CEO mode. "They're worried about the timeline on the AI integration. Think we promised more than we can deliver. I've tried to reassure them, but they want to hear it directly from you. They're giving us until tomorrow morning their time, that's tonight for us, to get on a call, or they're going with our competitor." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. One phone call, maybe 2 hours of her time. She could probably salvage the deal, keep the company on track, prevent the crisis. It was what a good CEO would do, what a responsible leader would do. But it was also exactly the pattern she'd come here to break. The pattern of always being available, always solving problems, always putting the company first because she'd confused her company with her identity. "David," she said slowly, "I trust you to handle this." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, what?" "I trust you to handle this. You know the technology as well as I do. You know what we can deliver and what we can't. You don't need me to speak for you. But Victoria, they specifically asked for you. If you're not on the call, then we might lose the deal. And if we do, we'll survive. We have other clients, other opportunities. But David, if I get on that call, if I drop everything and rush back into crisis management mode, then nothing changes. I keep being the person who sacrifices everything for the company, and I can't do that anymore. She could hear David struggling to process this. In 15 years of working together, she'd never refused to handle a crisis. Are you okay? Is something going on? I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than I've been in a long time. I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not constantly putting out fires, and I need you to trust me on this. I do trust you. I'm just worried about you. This isn't like you. I know, maybe that's a good thing. Victoria watched Mia playing in the distance, watched Ryan watching his daughter with that expression of pure love. Do your best with Singapore. If they walk, they walk. But David, thank you for caring about me, not just about the company. I appreciate that more than you know. After she hung up, Victoria stood for a moment, her heart racing, adrenaline and anxiety, and something that might have been liberation all competing for dominance. She'd just potentially cost her company millions of dollars. Her board would be furious. Her investors would question her judgment, but for the first time in her professional life, she'd chosen herself over the business. She walked back to the bench where Ryan sat waiting. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I don't know. I might have just made a massive mistake, or I might have just done the bravest thing I've ever done. I'm not sure there's a difference. You want to talk about it?" Victoria sat down beside him and told him about the call, about the decision she'd made, about the fear and exhilaration coursing through her system. Ryan listened without interruption, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you about the last mission I flew?" he said finally. Victoria nodded, surprised by the apparent non sequitur, but trusting that he had a point. It was a routine reconnaissance mission. Nothing dangerous, nothing exciting, just hours of flying in circles over terrain we'd mapped 100 times before. And I remember being up there, looking down at the world from 30,000 feet, thinking about how small everything looked. How all the things that seemed so important on the ground, the politics, the drama, the ego battles, were invisible from that altitude. He paused, his expression distant with memory. When I landed, I got a call that Emily had collapsed, that they'd found the cancer. And suddenly, all those hours I'd spent chasing the next mission, the next promotion, the next achievement, they felt like a waste, like I'd been optimizing for the wrong things. So what did you do? I made a choice. I could keep flying, keep climbing the ranks, keep building the career I'd always planned, or I could be present for Emily for whatever time we had left. I chose Emily, and yes, it meant giving up a career I loved. Yes, it meant starting over from nothing, but I've never regretted it, not once. Victoria felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm scared, Ryan. I'm scared that if I keep making choices like the one I just made, I'll lose everything I've built. And then what? Who am I if I'm not the CEO of Tech Vanguard? You're whoever you want to be. That's the terrifying and liberating truth. You get to decide. Mia ran up to them then, breathless and excited. Daddy, Victoria, my new friend Emma says there's ice cream trucks that come here sometimes. Can we get ice cream if one comes? Ryan glanced at his watch. It's almost dinner time, sweetheart. But it's a special day. Victoria is here, please? Ryan looked at Victoria, a smile playing at his lips. What do you think? Ice cream before dinner? Seems like the kind of thing someone learning to break the rules might do. Victoria found herself laughing through her tears. Ice cream before dinner sounds perfect. They didn't have to wait long. Within 15 minutes, they heard the distinctive music of an ice cream truck. Mia grabbed Victoria's hand and pulled her toward it, her excitement infectious. Victoria found herself standing in line with families and children, completely overdressed in her expensive clothes, makeup probably ruined from crying, hair undoubtedly disheveled from the afternoon breeze. And she didn't care. She ordered chocolate chip cookie dough. Mia got strawberry with rainbow sprinkles. Ryan chose mint chip. They sat on the grass in the shade of a large oak tree, eating ice cream with the unself-conscious pleasure of people who weren't worried about calories or appearances or whether this was appropriate behavior for a Sunday evening. "This is good," Mia announced, her face already streaked with pink. "This is the best day ever." "It really is," Victoria agreed, and meant it with a sincerity that surprised her. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ryan suggested they head back. Mia protested. She wanted to stay at the park forever, but her protests were half-hearted, weakened by the exhaustion of a full day of playing. The walk back to the house was quiet, peaceful. Mia held her father's hand on one side and Victoria's on the other, swinging between them, humming a song from her cartoon. Victoria felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness she couldn't fully articulate. This was what life could look like if she let it. Not impressive or Instagram-worthy, or aligned with any strategic objective. Just real, just present, just enough. Back at the house, Ryan started preparing dinner while Mia colored at the kitchen table. Victoria offered to help, and Ryan handed her a cutting board and vegetables with the same patience he'd shown teaching her about grilled cheese. "You're getting better at this," he teased as she carefully chopped carrots. "By the end of the week, you'll be ready for your own cooking show." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm still a long way from functional competence in the kitchen." "That's okay. Competence is overrated anyway. What matters is showing up and trying." They worked together in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from spending a day together, from building small intimacies through shared experiences. Victoria found herself acutely aware of Ryan's presence, the way he moved around the kitchen with easy familiarity, the casual grace of someone comfortable in his own space, the occasional brush of his arm against hers as they navigated the small kitchen. Dinner was simple: pasta with vegetables, garlic bread, a salad, the kind of meal Victoria's personal chef would probably scoff at. But sitting at that small table with Ryan and Mia, listening to the little girl's elaborate story about her imaginary friend who lived on the moon, Victoria felt more nourished than she'd felt at any five-star restaurant. After dinner, it was Mia's bedtime. She'd been yawning through dessert, more ice cream, because apparently they were fully committed to breaking all the rules today, and didn't protest when Ryan announced it was time to brush teeth and put on pajamas. "Will Victoria still be here when I wake up?" Mia asked, her voice sleepy. Victoria and Ryan exchanged glances. They hadn't talked about the logistics, about where Victoria would stay or how long she'd be here, or what any of this meant beyond the immediate present. "I think so," Victoria said, making the decision in real time. "If that's okay with your daddy." "More than okay," Ryan said quietly. Mia beamed, gave Victoria a spontaneous hug, and then dragged herself down the hall to get ready for bed. Ryan followed, leaving Victoria alone in the kitchen with the dinner dishes and her thoughts. She should feel guilty, should be anxious about the Singapore deal, about her abandoned calendar, about the professional reputation she might be damaging with every hour she stayed here. But instead, she felt calm, centered in a way she couldn't remember feeling before. Victoria started washing dishes, finding a meditative quality in the simple task. Warm water, soap, the repetitive motion of cleaning and rinsing. She could hear Ryan's voice drifting from down the hall, reading to Mia, his tone gentle and soothing. The same story about the velveteen rabbit, probably. About becoming real through being loved. By the time Ryan returned to the kitchen, Victoria had finished the dishes and was wiping down the counters. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I wanted to. It felt good to do something useful that wasn't strategic or high stakes or complicated." Ryan leaned against the doorframe, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "So, we should probably talk about the practical stuff. Where you're staying tonight, what happens tomorrow, all of that. I should probably get a hotel. I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. And besides, this is my aunt's house. She'd be thrilled to know I had company. There's a guest room, if you're comfortable with that. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and comfortable." Victoria nodded, feeling suddenly nervous. "Okay, thank you." "Victoria," Ryan said, his voice gentle, "we don't have to figure everything out tonight. We don't have to define what this is or make any big decisions. Let's just take it one day at a time, see what feels right." "One day at a time," Victoria repeated. "I can do that." They moved to the living room, settling on opposite ends of the couch with a comfortable distance between them. Ryan turned on the television but kept the volume low, creating background noise without demanding attention. "Tell me more about Emily," Victoria said. "Not about her death or the grief, but about her. About who she was when she was healthy and alive and herself." Ryan's face softened with memory. She had this laugh, this completely unguarded, joyful laugh that would just erupt out of her when something really struck her as funny, and she'd snort sometimes, and then she'd get embarrassed about the snort, which would make her laugh harder. It was contagious. He settled deeper into the couch, warming to the subject. She loved old movies, black and white films from the 40s and 50s. She'd watch them over and over, quoting lines, explaining the cultural context. She tried to teach me to appreciate them, but I never quite got it the way she did. I loved watching her watch them, though, the way her whole face would light up. She sounds wonderful. She was. She was also stubborn as hell, had terrible taste in music, and could not keep a plant alive to save her life. We had this running joke that she was a librarian who loved books but couldn't keep living things alive. Even cacti would die under her care. Victoria smiled. "I kill every plant I've ever owned, too. My assistant stopped trying to decorate my office with them after the third massacre." "See? You and Emily would have gotten along great. You could have formed a support group for plant murderers." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and vulnerabilities, building a foundation of understanding that felt both fragile and solid. Ryan told her about his childhood in rural Montana, about learning to fly in the military, about the adrenaline rush of combat missions, and the quieter satisfaction of helping his daughter tie her shoes. Victoria told him about growing up in Boston with parents who loved her in their way but never quite knew how to show it, about building a company from nothing, about the loneliness of standing on stage accepting awards while having no one to celebrate with afterward. At some point, the distance between them on the couch had disappeared. Victoria wasn't sure when it had happened, whether she'd moved closer or Ryan had, or they'd both gravitated toward each other unconsciously. But now she was acutely aware of his presence, of the warmth of his body beside hers, of the way his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Victoria," he said softly, "I want to be very clear about something. I'm not trying to fix you. You're not broken. You're just someone who's been running so hard and so long that you forgot you could stop. And I'm not some magical solution to your problems. I'm just a guy who's been where you are, questioning everything, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that makes sense. I know, you're not fixing me, you're showing me what's possible, what life can look like when you choose meaning over achievement. I'm also a man who's very attracted to you and is trying very hard to be respectful about that fact while you're figuring out your life." The honesty of it took Victoria's breath away. "Ryan, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just being honest. Because I think we've both had enough of pretending in our lives. But I want you to know that whatever this is, whatever develops between us or doesn't develop, I'm here because I want to be. Not because I need anything from you or expect anything from you." Victoria looked at this man who'd lost his wife, his career, his planned future, and had somehow emerged more whole than people who'd never suffered at all. She thought about all the men she'd dated over the years, ambitious executives who saw her as either a conquest or a threat, who competed with her even in intimate moments, who could never quite decide if they were attracted to her success or intimidated by it. Ryan was neither. He saw her, just her, not her title or her net worth or her carefully constructed image. Just the woman underneath all of that, scared and hopeful and trying to figure out how to live authentically for the first time in her adult life. "I'm attracted to you too," she admitted, "and also terrified by that fact, because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be vulnerable or open or anything other than competent and in control. Then we'll figure it out together, slowly. No pressure, no expectations. Just seeing what happens when two people are honest with each other." They sat in the quiet of the living room, the television long since turned off, the house settling into the particular silence of late night. Victoria felt exhaustion pulling at her, the kind that came from emotional intensity rather than physical exertion. But she didn't want to move, didn't want to break this moment, didn't want to return to being alone with her thoughts. "I should probably let you get some sleep," Ryan said eventually. "It's been a long day." "It has. The best kind of long day." He stood and offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet. They stood close for a moment, and Victoria had the distinct sense that something was about to shift between them, that they were balanced on the edge of something that would change everything if they let it. Ryan reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture tender and careful. "Sleep well, Victoria. Tomorrow's a new day." "Tomorrow's a new day," she repeated, the words feeling like both a promise and a question. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a double bed covered in a handmade quilt and a window that looked out onto the quiet street. Victoria borrowed a t-shirt from Ryan to sleep in. It was worn soft and smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something distinctly him, and lay in the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She'd missed a flight, canceled meetings, potentially lost a major deal, made decisions that would have consequences she couldn't yet predict, and yet she felt more at peace than she had in years. Her phone sat on the nightstand, still silenced, still accumulating notifications she hadn't looked at. Victoria reached for it, hesitated, then made a decision. She opened her email and composed a message to her leadership team. "Team, I'm taking some personal time to address matters that need my attention. David is in charge during my absence and has my full confidence. I'll be checking email periodically, but won't be available for calls or meetings until further notice. I trust you all to handle whatever comes up. Thank you for understanding. Victoria." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then turned off her phone completely. Whatever happened next, she would face it. But not tonight. Tonight she would sleep in a stranger's guest room wearing borrowed clothes, and she would let herself believe that starting over was possible. That reinventing yourself at 38 wasn't too late. That maybe, just maybe, she was on the edge of becoming real. Victoria woke to the sound of small feet padding down the hallway, and Mia's voice, stage whispering with the particular volume control of a 6-year-old trying to be quiet. "Daddy, is Victoria still here? Can I go check?" "Let her sleep, sweetheart. She had a long day yesterday." "But I want to show her my drawings." Victoria smiled into the pillow, surprised by how rested she felt, despite the unfamiliar bed and the emotional upheaval of the past day. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept past 6 in the morning, couldn't remember the last time she'd woken to the sound of a child's excitement rather than an alarm clock programmed to maximize productivity. She got up, smoothed down Ryan's borrowed t-shirt, and opened the bedroom door to find Mia standing in the hallway clutching a stack of papers, her face lighting up at the sight of Victoria. "You're awake! I made you pictures. Want to see?" "I would love to see them. Give me just a minute to wash my face, okay?" In the bathroom, Victoria studied her reflection. No makeup, hair disheveled, wearing someone else's clothes. She looked more human than she had in years, more real. She thought about the Velveteen Rabbit, about becoming real through being loved, and felt something shift permanently in her chest. When she emerged, Mia was waiting with barely contained patience. Victoria followed her to the kitchen, where Ryan was making pancakes with the same careful attention he seemed to bring to everything he did. "Good morning," he said, his smile warm and uncomplicated. "Coffee?" "Please, and good morning to you too." Mia spread her drawings across the kitchen table with the seriousness of an artist unveiling a gallery exhibition. "This one is you and me and Daddy at the park. See? That's you with the yellow hair, and this one is the airplane we flew on, and this one is all of us eating ice cream." Victoria examined each picture carefully, moved by the way this child had already incorporated her into the family narrative, as if she'd always been there. "These are beautiful, Mia. You're a very talented artist." "I know," Mia said matter-of-factly. "Daddy says I get it from Mommy. She used to draw too." Ryan set a plate of pancakes in front of Victoria, their eyes meeting briefly. Something passed between them, an understanding that didn't need words. They were building something here, something fragile and important, and they both knew it. Breakfast was relaxed, easy. Mia chattered about her plans for the day. She wanted to go back to the garden, wanted Victoria to see the library where her mommy used to work, wanted to teach Victoria how to play her favorite game. Ryan listened with patient attention, occasionally interjecting practical concerns about timing and feasibility. Victoria's phone, which she'd left in the guest room, remained blessedly silent. She'd turned it off completely, and the absence of constant connectivity felt like breathing after years of holding her breath. After breakfast, Ryan suggested they all go to the library. Emily worked at the downtown branch for 8 years. They have a children's section she helped design. Mia loves going there, and I think you'd appreciate seeing it. The drive was short. The library, a beautiful old building that had been lovingly maintained. Inside, the children's section was exactly what Victoria would have imagined from Ryan's description of Emily. Warm, inviting, designed with obvious care for the young minds that would inhabit it. There were reading nooks tucked into corners, colorful murals on the walls, and a special display of picture books that changed seasonally. Mia ran ahead to her favorite spot, a cushioned window seat with a view of a small garden. Ryan led Victoria to a plaque on the wall that read, "The Emily Brooks Memorial Children's Reading Room, a space for imagination, wonder, and the magic of stories." "The library put this up after she died," Ryan said quietly. "She never knew how many lives she touched, how many kids she helped fall in love with reading. But they remembered. When we held her memorial service, dozens of families showed up with stories about how Emily had recommended the perfect book for their child, had stayed late to help with school projects, had made the library feel like a second home." Victoria felt tears threatening. She built something meaningful, something that lasted. She did, not by trying to be impressive or important, just by showing up every day and caring about the work, about the people. Ryan turned to look at her. "I think that's what you're looking for. Not a different career or a different life necessarily, but a different way of measuring what matters." Before Victoria could respond, Mia called out from her window seat, "Victoria, come sit with me. I want to read you my favorite book." Victoria spent the next hour curled up in that window seat with a 6-year-old, reading about brave mice and clever rabbits and children who had adventures in magical lands. And somewhere in the middle of a story about a bear who learned to be kind, Victoria realized she was crying. "Why are you sad?" Mia asked, her small hand reaching up to touch Victoria's wet cheek. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm happy. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy too." "That's silly." "It is a little silly," Victoria agreed, pulling Mia closer. "But it's also kind of wonderful." When they finally left the library, Ryan suggested lunch at a small cafe nearby, the kind of neighborhood place where the owner knew regulars by name and the menu hadn't changed in 20 years. They ordered sandwiches and soup, and Victoria found herself relaxing into the ordinariness of it all, into the pleasure of a meal shared without agenda or networking opportunity. Her phone had been off for nearly 18 hours now. She tried to imagine what was happening at Tech Vanguard, how her team was handling her absence, whether they were panicking or rising to the occasion, whether her decision to step back would prove disastrous or liberating. But the anxiety that should have accompanied those thoughts never materialized. Instead, she felt curious, almost detached, as if she were observing her company from a distance and seeing it clearly for the first time. After lunch, Mia announced she was tired, the early morning excitement catching up with her, and Ryan suggested they return to the house for quiet time. In the car, Mia fell asleep within minutes, her head lolling against the car seat, small chest rising and falling with the deep peace of childhood sleep. "She's going to crash hard," Ryan said, glancing at his daughter in the rearview mirror. "Probably sleep for 2 hours if we're lucky." Back at the house, Ryan carried Mia inside and tucked her into bed without waking her. When he returned to the living room, he found Victoria standing at the window, staring out at the quiet street with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking that I should probably turn my phone back on, face whatever consequences are waiting for me. Figure out what happens next." "Are you ready for that?" Victoria turned to face him. "I don't know. Part of me wants to stay in this bubble forever, pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist. But that's not realistic, is it? I have responsibilities, people depending on me, decisions that need to be made." Ryan crossed the room to stand beside her. "Can I tell you what I think? Please." "I think you're going to turn on that phone and find that the world didn't end because you took 2 days off. I think you're going to discover that your team is more capable than you gave them credit for, that most of the crises that felt urgent weren't actually emergencies, and then you're going to have to decide what that means for how you want to live going forward. And if I'm wrong, if everything really did fall apart, then you'll deal with it. But Victoria, you're one of the most competent people I've ever met. You built $1 billion company from nothing. You're going to be fine no matter what's waiting for you." Victoria took a deep breath and retrieved her phone from the guest room. Her hands trembled slightly as she powered it on, watching the screen light up, and immediately began downloading what she imagined would be hundreds of notifications. The final count was 73 emails, 26 text messages, and 9 voicemails. Victoria scrolled through them, her heart rate increasing with each message, preparing for disaster. But the disaster never came. Instead, she found updates from David about the Singapore deal. He'd handled the call, addressed their concerns, and they'd agreed to move forward with modified terms. She found messages from her CFO confirming that Q2 projections were still on track. She found notes from her assistant efficiently rescheduling her canceled meetings. And she found an email from her board chair that simply said, "Hope everything's okay. Take the time you need. We've got this." Her team had handled everything without her. They'd risen to the occasion, made decisions, kept the company running. All the crises that had felt like they required her immediate attention had been resolved by competent people who'd been waiting for the opportunity to prove themselves. Victoria sat down heavily on the couch, phone still in her hand, processing this revelation. "They didn't need me." Ryan sat beside her. "They did need you, just not in the way you thought. They needed you to build the company and hire the right people and create systems that work, but they didn't need you to personally solve every problem. I don't know whether to feel relieved or obsolete. Feel relieved, feel liberated. This is proof that you can step back without everything collapsing, that you can choose a different way of leading." Victoria read through the messages again, more slowly this time, and noticed something she'd missed initially. The tone of her team's communications wasn't panicked or resentful. It was confident, almost energized, as if her absence had created space for them to step up, to show what they were capable of, to prove they deserved the trust she'd placed in them. She typed a response to David. "Excellent work on Singapore. I knew you could handle it. Thank you for stepping up." Then she sent a similar message to the rest of her leadership team, brief acknowledgments that they'd done well in her absence. Her phone immediately rang. "David." "Victoria, are you okay? Where are you? What happened?" "I'm in Pasadena. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I just needed some time to think." "Pasadena? Why Pasadena? Do you need me to come out there?" "No, I don't need you to come here. David, can I ask you something? And I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "Do you think I micromanage? Do you think my need to be involved in everything holds the team back?" There was a long pause. "I think you're incredibly talented and driven, and I think sometimes that talent and drive makes it hard for you to delegate, makes it hard for the rest of us to show you what we can do." That's a very diplomatic way of saying yes. "Victoria, you built this company. You have every right to be protective of it, but you also hired good people. Maybe it's time to trust us to do the jobs you hired us to do." "You're right. You're absolutely right." Victoria felt something loosening in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I'm going to stay in Pasadena for a few more days, maybe a week, and I need you to keep running things without me. Can you do that?" "Yes, but Victoria, are you sure you're okay? This is really unlike you." "I know, but I think that might be a good thing. I'll check in periodically, but I trust you to handle whatever comes up. And David? Thank you. For everything." After she hung up, Victoria turned to Ryan. "I just told my VP I'm staying in Pasadena for a week, without consulting you or asking if that's okay, or considering the fact that this is your aunt's house, and I'm basically an interloper." Ryan's smile was slow and warm. "You're not an interloper, and for what it's worth, I'd like you to stay. Mia would like you to stay, but only if that's what you actually want, not because you're running away from something." "I think I'm running toward something. I'm just not entirely sure what yet." "Then stay. Figure it out. We'll help however we can." The week that followed was unlike anything Victoria had ever experienced. She woke with the household, helped make breakfast, learned to braid Mia's hair with YouTube tutorials, and Ryan's patient coaching. She went on walks through the neighborhood, noticing things she'd never noticed before. The way morning light filtered through tree leaves, the sound of wind chimes on someone's porch, the particular rhythm of suburban life. She helped Ryan with small home repairs, handing him tools and learning the names of things she'd always paid other people to handle. She discovered she enjoyed the tactile satisfaction of fixing broken things, of solving problems that had concrete solutions and visible results. She read to Mia every afternoon during quiet time, working through picture books and early chapter books, marveling at the way stories could create entire worlds with just words and imagination. And in the evenings, after Mia went to bed, she sat with Ryan on the back porch, talking about everything and nothing, building an intimacy that went beyond physical attraction into something deeper and more real. On the fourth day, Ryan's aunt came home from a business trip. Margaret Brooks was in her late 50s, with Ryan's same warm eyes and straightforward manner. She took one look at Victoria, then at her nephew, and smiled knowingly. "So, you're the mysterious guest Ryan mentioned. It's nice to meet you, Victoria. Thank you for letting me stay in your home. I hope it's not too much of an imposition. Any friend of Ryan's is welcome here, though I have to say, in the 3 years since Emily died, he's never once mentioned having a friend who needed to stay for a week. This must be quite a friendship." Victoria felt herself blushing while Ryan looked simultaneously embarrassed and amused. That evening, after Mia was in bed, Margaret joined them on the back porch with a bottle of wine and a directness that reminded Victoria of Ryan. "I'm going to be blunt," Margaret said, settling into a chair. "Ryan told me a bit about your situation, about you being a CEO who's questioning everything, and I want to tell you something from my own experience." Victoria nodded, curious. "I spent 25 years climbing the corporate ladder in pharmaceutical sales, made good money, earned awards, got promoted regularly, and I was miserable. Absolutely miserable. But I kept going because I thought that's what success looked like. Thought if I just pushed a little harder, achieved a little more, something would finally feel satisfying." Margaret took a sip of wine, her expression distant with memory. "Then my husband died suddenly. Heart attack at 49, and I realized I'd spent 2 decades chasing something that didn't matter, neglecting the things that did. So I quit. Took a year off to figure out what I actually wanted. And you know what I discovered?" "What?" "That I loved teaching. That I'd always loved teaching, but thought it wasn't prestigious enough, didn't pay enough, wasn't impressive enough. So I went back to school, got my teaching credential, and now I teach high school chemistry. Make a fraction of what I used to make, and I'm happier than I've ever been." "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked. "Giving up the career you'd built?" "Not once, because here's what I learned. You can't take your career with you when you die. You can't take your bank account or your awards or your impressive title. The only thing you take is how you made people feel, how you showed up in the world, whether you lived authentically or spent your life performing for an audience that doesn't actually care about you." Ryan reached over and squeezed his aunt's hand. "That's basically the speech she gave me when I was having a breakdown about leaving the military." "And you didn't listen at first," Margaret said with affection, "but you got there eventually." Victoria felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by the generosity of these people who barely knew her but were offering wisdom earned through hard experience. "Thank you for being so honest with me, for welcoming me into your home. Honey, anyone who can make my nephew smile the way he's been smiling this week is welcome anytime. And besides, I have a feeling you're not just passing through. I have a feeling you're exactly where you need to be." On the 6th day, Victoria finally opened her laptop. Not to work, but to write. She started documenting her thoughts, her realizations, the way this week had fundamentally altered her understanding of success and meaning and what constituted a life well lived. She wrote about Emily, a woman she'd never met but who'd taught her through absence what presence actually meant. She wrote about Mia, whose uncomplicated joy reminded her that wonder was a choice available to anyone willing to pay attention. And she wrote about Ryan, who'd shown her that strength came in many forms, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was admit you needed to change. When she finished, she had 15 single-space pages, not a business plan or strategic document, but something more like a manifesto, a declaration of new values, new priorities, a new definition of success that had nothing to do with stock prices and everything to do with meaning. She showed it to Ryan that evening after Mia was asleep. He read it carefully, taking his time, occasionally nodding or smiling. When he finished, he looked up with something that might have been pride in his eyes. "This is brave," he said. "This is you figuring out who you want to be. What are you going to do with it?" I'm going to go back to San Francisco, face my board, make some changes. What kind of changes? Victoria took a deep breath. I'm going to step back from day-to-day operations, promote David to CEO, stay on as board chair, provide strategic guidance, but stop trying to control everything. And I'm going to start a foundation focused on supporting single parents, help with childcare costs, education expenses, career training, the kind of support you could have used after Emily died. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. That's a big change. Are you sure? I'm terrified, but I'm also sure. I can't keep living the way I was living, and I have resources that could make a real difference in people's lives. Your life showed me what matters. Now I want to build something that honors that. What about your company? What if the board doesn't support this? Then I'll deal with that. But Ryan, I've spent 15 years proving I can build something impressive. Now I want to prove I can build something meaningful. He pulled her close, and Victoria let herself lean into his embrace, feeling safe in a way she'd never felt with anyone else. I'm proud of you. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you for having the courage to change. I couldn't have done it without you, without this week, without seeing what an authentic life actually looks like. Ryan tilted her chin up, his expression serious. Victoria, you have to know, I don't want you to make any decisions because of me, because of feelings you might have or might think you have. This has to be about you, about what you need for yourself. I know, and it is about me. But it's also true that meeting you changed something fundamental, showed me what I was missing, what I want. And what do you want? Victoria looked into his eyes, seeing her own vulnerability reflected back at her. I want to build a life that matters. I want to measure success by how present I am, not how productive. I want to be with someone who sees me, really sees me, and loves what they see. I want to stop running and start living. I can't promise you easy, Ryan said softly. I'm a janitor with a kid and medical debt and a past full of grief. I don't have anything impressive to offer you. You have everything I need. You have presence and kindness and the courage to live authentically. That's not nothing. That's everything. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, and Victoria felt something click into place. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing she was searching. Not perfection or impressive achievement, but connection, authenticity, love that asked for presence rather than performance. The next morning, Victoria called for a car to take her to the airport. Mia cried when she said goodbye, making Victoria promise to come back soon, to call her, to remember her. Ryan held his daughter while she cried, then pulled Victoria into a hug that felt like both an ending and a beginning. Go do what you need to do, he said. Make your changes, build your foundation, figure out your life, and when you're ready, if you want this, us, we'll be here. I want this. I want us. But you're right that I need to handle my life first. Make the changes without running away from responsibility. I know you will. You're stronger than you think. On the flight back to San Francisco, Victoria sat in first class and thought about the last time she'd made this journey, how she'd been a different person then, hollow and exhausted, running on ambition and anxiety. Now she felt solid, grounded, scared but also certain that she was finally moving in the right direction. She used the flight time to draft her presentation to the board, choosing her words carefully. She wasn't asking for permission, she was informing them of changes she was making. Changes that would allow her to step back from operations while still providing strategic leadership. Changes that would free her team to rise to their potential. Changes that would let her build something meaningful with her resources and experience. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 days after her return. Victoria spent those days meeting individually with board members, explaining her thinking, addressing concerns, building consensus. Some were resistant, concerned about the impact on stock price, about investor confidence, about the precedent of a founder stepping back. But others understood, respected her honesty, supported her vision. When the full board convened, Victoria presented her plan with the same competence and authority she'd always brought to leadership, but with a new element, authenticity. She didn't pretend this was purely a business decision. She admitted she'd been burned out, that she'd been micromanaging, that she needed to change not just for her own sake, but for the company's health. I built Tech Vanguard, she told them, and I'm proud of what we've accomplished. But I've also realized that my reluctance to truly delegate has created a bottleneck. David has proven he can lead. The team has proven they can execute without my constant involvement. It's time for me to trust what I've built and step into a different role. The vote was unanimous. David would become CEO effective immediately. Victoria would remain as board chair, providing strategic guidance while stepping back from operations. And the board approved seed funding for her foundation, recognizing the positive PR value of their founder pivoting to social impact. That evening, Victoria called Ryan from her apartment, the penthouse that suddenly felt less like home and more like a museum of her former life. "I did it," she told him. "Made the changes. Stepped back, started the process of becoming who I want to be. How does it feel?" "Terrifying and liberating and right. So right." She paused, looking around at her expensive furniture and curated art and the view that had once impressed her so much. "Ryan, I want to ask you something, and I don't want you to answer right away. I want you to really think about it. Okay? What if we didn't do long distance? What if we actually built something together? You and Mia could move here, or I could move there, or we could find somewhere new altogether. I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I also know that life is short and uncertain, and I don't want to waste time being cautious when I could be building something real." Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "Victoria, I need to be honest with you. I can't uproot Mia from her school, her friends, her support system. Not right now. She's still healing from losing her mom. She needs stability." Victoria felt her heart sink, but she understood. Of course she understood. Mia had to come first. "You're right, I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm sorry." "But," Ryan continued, "there's nothing keeping me in Pasadena except proximity to Margaret and Mia's school. If you were willing to move here, if you were willing to build a life in a place that's not impressive or exciting, if you were willing to let me keep doing the work I do while you build your foundation from here, then maybe we could figure something out. Slowly, carefully, putting Mia's needs first." "I would move there tomorrow," Victoria said without hesitation. "I would live in a studio apartment and work from a coffee shop and count myself lucky. Because what you have, what Mia has, what we could build together, that's more valuable than any penthouse or prestigious address." "You say that now, but Victoria, my life is really ordinary. I'm not going to suddenly become impressive or ambitious or wealthy. I'm going to keep fixing toilets and driving for ride shares and living modestly because that's what my life requires right now. I don't want impressive. I want real. I want you. I want Mia. I want to be part of something that matters in the ways that actually count." "Then let's take it slow. Come back to Pasadena when you can. Let Mia get used to having you around. Let us build this carefully, making sure it's solid before we make any big decisions. Can you do that?" "Yes, I can do that." Over the next 6 months, Victoria divided her time between San Francisco and Pasadena. She found an apartment near Ryan's, modest by her previous standards, but more than adequate for her actual needs. She learned the rhythms of their life, showing up for Mia's school plays and soccer games, helping with homework, making dinners with varying degrees of success. She launched her foundation, hiring a small staff and beginning to provide support to single parents in the community. She saw the impact of her resources in concrete, immediate ways. A single mom able to afford childcare and keep her job, a widowed father able to pay for his daughter's school supplies, families getting the support that Ryan had needed and never received. And she fell in love. Not the dramatic, overwhelming kind of love from movies, but the steady, deep kind that came from showing up consistently, from being present through ordinary moments, from choosing each other every day, even when it wasn't easy or convenient or impressive. Ryan proposed on a Tuesday evening after dinner while they were washing dishes together in Margaret's kitchen, and Mia was finishing her homework at the table. There was no grand gesture, no elaborate plan, just Ryan turning to Victoria with soapy hands and saying, "I want to spend my life with you, if you want that too." Victoria said yes without hesitation. They married 6 months later in Margaret's backyard, with Mia as flower girl and Victoria's small leadership team in attendance. David gave a toast about how Victoria had taught him that real leadership meant trusting others to lead. Margaret spoke about the courage it takes to start over. And Mia, wearing a yellow dress with light-up shoes, announced to everyone that Victoria was going to be her new mommy, and that was the best thing that had ever happened to her, except for maybe ice cream. Victoria wore a simple dress, nothing like the designer gown she might have chosen in her previous life. But as she stood under a flower-covered arch and promised to love Ryan for the rest of her days, she felt more beautiful than she'd ever felt in couture and diamonds. That night, after Mia was asleep and the guests had gone home, Victoria and Ryan sat on the back porch under the stars. Victoria thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, exhausted, hollow, accomplished, but empty. And she thought about who she'd become, someone who measured success by presence rather than productivity, who valued meaning over achievement, who'd learned to stop and look at the koi. "Thank you," she said to Ryan. "For what?" "For seeing me, for showing me what was possible, for loving me even when I was still figuring out how to be lovable." Ryan pulled her close. "You were always lovable. You just needed to give yourself permission to believe it." 2 years later, Victoria stood on a stage at a nonprofit leadership conference. She wore simple clothes, minimal makeup, her hair in a style that was practical rather than perfect. And when she was introduced, not as CEO of Tech Vanguard, but as founder of the Brooks Foundation for Single-Parent Support, she felt more pride than any business award had ever given her. "I want to tell you about a flight from Chicago to Los Angeles," she began, and the audience leaned in, ready to hear about networking or a business revelation or some strategic insight. Instead, Victoria told them about a man who let a stranger sleep on his shoulder, about a little girl who reminded her to look for beauty, about learning that the most successful life isn't the most impressive one, but the most meaningful, about discovering that real strength comes from vulnerability, real courage comes from admitting you need to change, and real success comes from showing up with love for the people and causes that matter. She told them about Emily, whose life had touched hundreds without ever making headlines, about Ryan, who measured his worth by how present he was for his daughter rather than how high he climbed, about choosing a different mountain to climb, one that didn't lead up but led deeper into authentic connection and meaningful impact. When she finished, there was silence, then applause that built slowly, people rising to their feet, not because she'd impressed them with achievement, but because she'd moved them with honesty. Afterward, a young woman approached her, eyes red from crying. "I'm the VP of operations at a startup. We just got Series B funding, and I should be thrilled, but I'm miserable. I've been working 80-hour weeks for 3 years, and I can't remember the last time I saw my family or did anything just because I wanted to. How did you know it was time to change?" Victoria thought about her answer carefully. "I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't keep living the way I was living. And I think that's enough. You don't need permission to want something different. You don't need to wait until you hit rock bottom. You just need to be brave enough to admit that impressive and meaningful aren't always the same thing, and to choose meaning even when it looks less impressive from the outside. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I give up something important for something that turns out to be a mistake? Then you'll have made a mistake. But here's what I've learned. You can rebuild from mistakes. You can change your mind. You can start over at any age, in any circumstance. What you can't get back is time spent living someone else's definition of success. Time spent performing instead of being present. Time spent achieving things that don't actually matter to you." The young woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." Victoria watched her walk away and felt something she'd never felt during her years as a CEO. She felt like she'd made a difference. Not in quarterly earnings or market share or any metric that impressed investors, but in a real human life, at a moment when it mattered. That evening, she returned to the home she now shared with Ryan and Mia, a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing like the penthouse she'd once owned, but infinitely more valuable. Mia ran to greet her, 8 years old now and full of stories about her day at school. Ryan was cooking dinner, something that smelled amazing and probably involved vegetables Victoria had learned to appreciate. This was her life now. Ordinary and extraordinary. Unimpressive by conventional standards and more meaningful than anything she'd built before. A life measured not in achievements but in moments. Not in what she'd accomplished, but in who she'd become. Later that night, after Mia was tucked in bed with the Velveteen Rabbit story she never tired of hearing, Victoria stood in the backyard looking up at the stars. Ryan joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Good day? He asked. The best. I told our story, about the plane, about falling asleep on a stranger, about learning what actually matters. And what actually matters? Victoria turned in his arms to face him. This, right here. You and me and Mia and the life we're building together. The foundation helping families who need support, the work that feels meaningful even when it's hard. Knowing that when I die, I'll be remembered not for what I achieved, but for how I loved. Ryan kissed her forehead. Emily would have liked you. She would have been proud of the choice you made. I hope so, because I make it every day. I choose this life. I choose us. I choose meaning over achievement, presence over productivity, being real over being impressive. No regrets? Victoria thought about the question seriously. Did she miss aspects of her old life? The recognition, the power, the particular satisfaction of closing a major deal? Sometimes. But missing something didn't mean regretting its loss. It just meant acknowledging that every choice involved trade-offs. No regrets, she said firmly. Just gratitude. For the flight that changed everything. For your kindness. For the courage to become someone new. For learning that success isn't measured in altitude, but in depth. They stood together in the quiet of their backyard, under stars that had witnessed the entire journey, from a chance encounter on a plane to a life rebuilt around what actually mattered. And Victoria thought about the Velveteen Rabbit, about becoming real through being loved, about the way transformation happened not through dramatic gestures, but through consistent choices to show up authentically, to love without condition, to measure success by impact rather than impression. She had fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder and woken up to a different life, had lost an identity built on achievement and found one built on meaning, had traded impressive for real and discovered that real was infinitely more valuable. The next morning, Victoria woke early, not from anxiety or obligation, but from genuine eagerness to start the day. She made coffee, packed Mia's lunch with care, and sat at the kitchen table reviewing grant applications for the foundation. Each application represented a family needing support, a life she could impact, a chance to pass forward the grace that had been shown to her. Ryan appeared, still sleepy, and dropped a kiss on top of her head before pouring his own coffee. Mia shuffled in wearing mismatched pajamas, her hair a disaster that would require Victoria's now competent braiding skills. This was her life. These were her people. This was success redefined, measured not in stock prices but in small moments of connection, not in impressive achievements but in consistent presence, not in how high she'd climbed but in how deeply she'd loved. And Victoria Hale, former CEO, current foundation director, wife and mother, looked around her modest kitchen at her ordinary, extraordinary family and knew with absolute certainty that she'd finally gotten it right. She'd finally understood what the stranger on the plane had known all along. That the most successful life isn't the most impressive one, but the one lived with presence, purpose, and love.